the girl suddenly becomes the heroine of a ghostly story. It was terrifying. When she woke up, she found herself lying inside the original owner's coffin. She sat upright and tilted her head slightly. Platinum hair spilled down like a waterfall. Her blazing red pupils swept across the morning hall. "What is my name?" A voice escaped through the teeth and lips of someone who had seemed dead, making the entire hall sink into a dreadful silence. No one dared answer. The flickering candlelight illuminated faces twisted with extreme terror. The priest's prayer caught in his throat. The face that always wore an air of compassion was now distorted, as though he had just seen a demon climbing up from the cracks of hell. One day earlier, Evangeline, the only daughter of Count Rohansen's family, had died. The official reports said she died of illness, but the servants who worked in the Count's mansion would never be able to forget that sight, pale feet swaying in the wind, hanging from a cherry blossom branch in full bloom. The blossoms were a moving shade of deep crimson, and even now it seemed as if their sweet fragrance still lingered at the tip of the nose. Perhaps that was because the cherry blossoms scattered throughout the coffin had replaced the usual white lilies. Because the cause of death was far from honorable, the funeral was ultimately held inside the mansion instead of outside. Normally, after the ceremony ended, the body should have been placed in the temple. But in the end, it was decided that a gravestone would be erected and she would be buried in the back garden. The temple had always refused to accept those who had taken their own lives. This was truly a last resort. Yet those who did not know the full story only praised the Count's deep paternal love and lamented this funeral for being far too simple. Ordinarily, a noble's funeral should have been lavish and grand. Yet Evangeline's ceremony was conspicuously shabby, completely unlike the ostentation a noble young lady should have had. The Count's family used the excuse of a spreading epidemic to refuse condolences from other houses. At the scene, there were only the servants of the mansion and a few knights. It was unclear whether it was because there were so few guests or because this was clearly a funeral and yet there was not a single person shedding tears for the deceased. As a result, the whole place was filled with a chilling atmosphere. Only the prayer chanted by the priest still carried a trace of gloom. The one presiding over the funeral was an obscure priest, though the way he recited the prayer and his spotless white ceremonial robes made him appear devout. If he had truly cared about his honor, he never would have lowered himself for a few gold coins. When the priest finished his part, the ceremony gradually approached its end. All that remained was to close the coffin lid and lower the body into the prepared grave. However, in the deathly silent morning hall, strange and grating rustling sounds suddenly rang out. The priest, who cared greatly for his own dignity, cleared his throat and issued a warning, trying to continue leading the prayer. But the commotion only grew worse. The sound of grass and leaves scraping together, the sound of something knocking against bones, the creak of wood, those little noises kept building up. Finally, as the crowd began to murmur in alarm, the priest could no longer endure it. He stopped praying and snapped his eyes open. And then he saw the source of all the chaos. Silver white hair cascaded down like a waterfall. At first glance, that seemingly soft hair looked instead like a mass of spider silk drawn out into long strands. Beneath it, her eyelids slowly parted, revealing bright crimson eyes. That red did not resemble the mineral sheen of ruby, but rather evoked the vivid reality of a living creature's beating heart. Aside from those blazing red eyes, her entire body was deathly pale and flawless. Wearing nothing but a single white dress among a crowd dressed in black mourning clothes, she looked like something stripped away from the real world, silent, cold, and pallid. The priest kept calling upon the gods in his mind, squeezing his eyes shut and muttering prayers, but unfortunately it did no good at all. That resurrected body was now beginning to move. Starting by bending her fingers, she tried to curl her hand into a fist, blinked, then slowly turned her head. It seemed as though something beyond all understanding was gradually adapting to this unfamiliar body. She looked up at the swaying chandelier on the ceiling, then swept her gaze over the crowd in the morning hall. Everyone who accidentally met those eyes trembled violently, covering their mouths and holding their breath, to be stared at by an ominous thing that should not not exist, that should never have appeared in this world. Honestly, it might have felt better to just end one's life outright. At last, that being spoke. What is my name? The one occupying Evangeline Rohansen's body, after adapting to it, showed a deeply satisfied smile. Only a few days later did she realize she had transmigrated. She tried hard to remember why she had left her own world. She had been healthy, had not yet gone to work, had not overworked herself, and she certainly had not been hit by some otherworldly truck. After thinking it over, it seemed she had simply fallen asleep and quietly passed away. Had transmigration become this casual nowadays? They could not even be bothered to set up a teleportation circle. Oh well. Since she was already here, she might as well go with the flow. Worrying about such things was useless anyway. What mattered was that this body before her had not left behind even a trace of the original owner's memories. In a way, that saved her the trouble of personality conflict during the adjustment period. But the problem was, why did the transmigration have to happen right in the middle of the funeral? No wonder those people had looked at her as if they had seen a ghost. From the priest's point of view, this really had been a scene of a corpse coming back to life. At the time, she had only wanted to ask for a name so she could somehow get through the situation. Instead, she ended up being interrogated by the priest and doctor for an entire day. Thinking about it now still gave her a headache. She did not even know which novel she had transmigrated into. The martial arts stories she had read recently were completely useless in this situation. Since she knew nothing at all about the original owner, she had no choice but to pretend she had amnesia. Fortunately, there was still one maid willing to help her. Based on what the maid told her, she pieced together some information. This was a novel world centered on a villainous side character who had been possessed. Every time the servants saw her, they lowered their heads and bowed. When they spoke, they shook like leaves. Some people fainted the instant they saw her face. One maid even fell to her knees and begged for her life the moment they met, and was dragged away immediately. Just how cruel had the original owner been to terrify young girls to this extent? She thought to herself that she should try to live a little more kindly. On top of that, this body had a pair of red eyes. In the worldview of this kind of novel, red was an ominous color. People born with red eyes were destined to be ostracized from birth, until the male lead casually said something like, "I think they're beautiful," and then they would act as if struck by lightning and fall madly in love with him. Evangeline was the only daughter of the Rohansen Count's family. Her mother had died early, and her relationship with her father was extremely cold. She had died and come back to life, and her father still had not bothered to visit even once. Fathers of villainous side characters were usually either scum or absurdly doting, and, unfortunately, she had landed on the former. She also did not have any fiancé. Usually, in settings like this, if the male lead was not the crown prince, then he was at least the northern Grand Duke. But the harsh reality was that the crown prince was already middle-aged and had 2 children. There was no Grand Duke in the north, and there was no sign whatsoever of any saintess or holy son. That was all the information the maid could provide, so she decided she had to go look for the original owner's diary. But then another problem arose. She could not read. The maid froze for a moment after hearing that, then hurriedly said, "By tomorrow, I'll buy you some books to learn from." As soon as she finished speaking, she ran off for dear life. Was there really a need to run that fast? Taking the opportunity, she began wandering around the mansion to explore. Nothing in the bedroom, nothing in the bathroom, nothing in the sitting room either. She had found absolutely nothing. Wait, when a maid had shown her around earlier, she had mentioned that the original owner had a forbidden room that no one was allowed to enter. Could something be hidden there? She walked over to the door and tried to pull it, but it would not budge. She put both hands into it, and at last the door gave way with loosened force, throwing her backward. The door opened a crack, and she lifted her head to look into the depths of the room. A 3-eyed cat with spotted, leopard-like fur was crouching quietly in the darkness. All 3 eyes turned toward her at once. As for the maid Daisy, she had forced herself to suppress her fear in order to volunteer to take care of this monster. In truth, it was so she could report the situation to Count Rohansen. The monster that had taken over the shell of the deceased young lady was using the excuse of amnesia to ask about everything concerning Miss Evangeline, from her age and habits to her family relationships and even her food preferences. Hearing that the young lady took a walk every day at 8 in the morning, it rummaged through her clothes and put them on. It wanted to become Miss Evangeline, but its imitation was not convincing at all. Even when it saw maids faint on the spot or heard desperate cries for help, it did not care in the slightest. On the contrary, those blazing red eyes were full of contempt and disgust, as if it were looking down on worms wriggling by the roadside. The Miss Evangeline Daisy knew, well, was not like that at all. She was a weak girl who would rather swallow her grievances than speak maliciously to others. If it truly wanted to disguise itself, then it should not look at people with such eyes. And yet, suddenly, it expressed a desire to learn to read. Daisy agreed to buy books for it, but immediately realized that was only an excuse to send her away. In that brief moment, it vanished. Only after searching the whole mansion did she discover that the door to the locked room, which clearly had no key, somehow had it sitting inside, calmly reading a book. So, to get a better look, Daisy held her breath and peered through the gap in the door. She discovered it was using syrup from its fingertips to draw patterns on the floor, while muttering the word contract in a voice too faint to hear clearly. Daisy cautiously poked her head in, but unfortunately met that thing's gaze. This was everything Daisy had witnessed. Count Rohan Zinn stroked his chin in thought. Runes drawn with fresh syrup and a contract. Could it be some kind of dark magic? His daughter's body being occupied by that parasite had already left his mind unsettled. Was it now planning to call even more such things? Everything had begun because his daughter had sought her own death. The temple refused to conduct the funeral, and even burial had become a thorny problem. That was what gave an evil spirit the opportunity to cling to her. The most troublesome part was that even holy water could not drive that evil spirit away. Having no other choice, he could only continue observing. Just as he was about to say a few encouraging words to Daisy, he suddenly noticed that she still had her eyes tightly shut. Why were her eyes still closed? Instead, Daisy looked puzzled. Of course it's because I'm scared. That thing kept staring at me, my Lord Count. Staring at you? Count Rohan Zinn abruptly turned his head, and immediately, his eyes met countless swollen eyeballs fixed directly on him. How could they have known that the eerie existence in their minds was actually just an ordinary girl desperately trying to survive? She had used a great deal of effort just to open that room. Inside, it was filled with paintings covered completely with cloth. It seemed Evangeline had loved painting. She had forbidden others to enter, and had even carefully covered everything with fabric. The diary was very likely on the bookshelf. Although she could not read the language of this world, she could still use elimination. Titles that were too neat, eliminate. Thick ones like dictionaries, eliminate. Print that looked too proper, discard those too. Just then, she found a notebook stained with ink. However, its pitch-black cover looked strangely eerie, completely unfitting for what she imagined a villainess's taste should be. As she casually flipped through the pages, a piece of paper suddenly fell out. It was circular, combined with geometric patterns. This was definitely 100% a summoning circle. To think a summoning circle had been hidden inside the diary. She began to get excited. It looked like this novel was actually fairly old school. These days, nobody was into making contracts with darkness anymore. Without the slightest hesitation, she decided to draw one herself. After all, if she was going to be a villainess, she needed at least some means of self-defense. It just so happened there were paint here already. Although there were plenty of brushes, this kind of magic circle had to be drawn with one's finger to really feel right. Whether it was a spirit or a dragon, she would just find someone, anyone, to make a contract with. That night, she fell into a deep sleep, and the contracted creature she had chosen descended along with it. When she woke the next morning, a three-eyed cat had appeared beside her, with creamy fur dotted with leopard-like spots. Cats in another world really were extraordinary like this. Looking at the tiny creature, so adorable and obedient, she swallowed softly. Even if its power was a little weak, that should be fine, right? The heroine of a horror legend, whose very name terrified people, innocently mistook herself for nothing more than an ordinary villainess. When unpleasant people suddenly disappeared for no apparent reason, she thought it was simply the plot's demand. If she casually grumbled about the bad weather, the whole sky would immediately brighten with sunshine, and she would assume it was just a coincidence. Little did she know that the tiny darling she had summoned for self-defense was actually the incarnation of calamity. Every casual word she spoke became a divine decree. Anyone who dared approach her was watched and monitored with no blind spots, forced to live each day in an unnameable fear. And yet the source of all that terror was, at this moment, hugging the little cat and nuzzling it like crazy. The moment she saw a maid enter, she immediately restored her villainous image. Seeing that this maid was different from the one yesterday, she did not think much of it. They were probably just working in shifts. To get closer to the new maid, she started a conversation with a cute topic. Does the Count's family keep a lot of cats? But the maid kept an expressionless face as she replied, they were all exterminated long ago. The maid added, because the cats brought disease. The girl instantly became highly alert. If this little one was discovered, it would be a disaster. Then, in the very next second, a meow rang out. The maid's eyes darted around. Was that a cat? Evangeline forced herself to remain calm. I didn't hear anything. How strange. The sound clearly came from somewhere very close. She did her best to pretend not to hear it, silently lamenting. Sweetie, stop meowing. If they find you, you're done for. Fortunately, the maid left without searching the room. Otherwise, her heart probably would have stopped. She had thought this kitten lived here already, but in the blink of an eye, she had become someone who had secretly taken in a cat without the family's permission. But if she threw it outside now, it would die. Its family was probably gone too. Better to let the priest and doctor examine it thoroughly first, and then she could keep it. As the pet of the Count's daughter, surely they would not harm it. Just as she was about to ask the Count for permission, she was stopped right outside the door. The butler bowed and said, My apologies. Mississippi Count Rohin's Inn is currently occupied with official business. He instructed that he cannot meet with you. If there is anything you need conveyed, it is fine to tell me as well. Evangeline hurriedly put a hand on his shoulder to help him straighten up. Just what kind of exalted being had the original owner been to make an older man bow 90 degrees before her like that? But that action only startled the butler so badly that he cried out. She quickly withdrew her hand. I just want to keep a cat. Is that not allowed? The butler looked troubled and raised a hand to rub his shoulder. That's not it. Not long after, she received permission. She had planned to take it for an examination, but the butler said it only needed to drink holy water. If holy water could cure illness, then why had they been so cruel to the cats from the beginning? After confirming that the little cat had finished drinking the holy water, the butler left. A little later, a maid brought over a collar and said hesitantly that the other servants might hurt the kitten. What did Milady think of embroidering its name on the collar and putting on the cat? Evangeline immediately agreed to the suggestion, but unfortunately, she couldn't read. She knew even less about embroidery. Before she could explain, the maid had already run off as if fleeing for her life. Even the person who had promised to buy her books to learn reading had vanished without a trace. Looking at the trembling, frightened servants, she felt like some villainess abusing her status to bully people. So that setting had been included too. She was even being quietly ostracized. Sorry, baby, I can't read. I really do want to learn quickly. She silently complained that this transmigration setup was way too sloppy. This was seriously too much. Who would have thought that after one night's sleep, she suddenly became able to read? Was this special treatment for a transmigrator? Since she could read now, maybe she could also use the body's memories to embroider. But the finished result was so miserable, it was painful to look at. Even she herself couldn't tell what she had embroidered. While she was wondering whether to start over from scratch, the kitten suddenly meowed insistently, urging her to put the collar on it quickly. What a little angel of a cat. In the past, she had never been able to keep one because circumstances didn't allow it. Now, at last, her wish had come true. She hugged the kitten tightly to her chest. From today on, your name will be Pudding. In the middle of the night, the maid Kana was beside herself with worry. If only she could get that thing, her little sister could be saved. Holy water was that precious, so how could it possibly be wasted so easily? Do you want it? Kana turned and looked around, but there wasn't a single person there. Only the cat was slowly licking its fur. It was the cat Miss Evangeline was raising. You said you wanted that bottle of water, didn't you? You can take it. I'll tell you how to get it. The cat opened its eyes. All three eyes drilled into Kana at once. Evangeline stood quietly alone beneath a flowering tree, letting petals drift across her long hair. Kana stood by the window. Through the glass, she stared fixedly at the figure in the garden. Then she pulled the curtains shut and tied them, completely blocking out the scene outside. Count Rohanzin had already departed for his territory under the pretense of an inspection tour, but it would be more accurate to say he was running away. Whenever he stayed in the mansion, he was constantly on edge, always feeling as though countless pairs of eyes were watching him from the darkness. As he hurriedly left, he took only a few changes of clothes with him. His retreating figure looked exactly like someone fleeing into the night. It wasn't only the Count. The maid Daisy made a similar choice. She refused a letter of recommendation to work at another noble estate, picked up her suitcase, and stepped through the gates of a convent. The daily affairs of the estate were left entirely in the butler's hands. As for the family's other business, Count Rohanzin could handle it perfectly well from his territory. So the only thing the butler needed to concern himself with now was the one wearing Evangeline's skin. And Kana's task was precisely that. She knocked on the butler's door, bowed slightly, and said in a low voice, "I have something to report." She had no choice but to tell him everything about it. After Daisy left, Kana had taken over the duty of caring for Evangeline. Given all the strange things that had happened to Daisy, no one in the estate wanted to go near the young lady anymore. Because of that, the mansion raised the pay for the position, and someone as desperately poor as Kana had finally accepted it. As Kana poured tea for the butler, she quietly recounted what had happened. "I heard a cat meowing. The young lady asked me if there were any cats being kept here. I told her all the cats had died. We clearly got rid of all of them, so why can I still hear it?" The butler apparently couldn't hear the sound at all. In his eyes, a maid as capable as Kana had, in just a short time, become mentally unstable. The butler looked at Kana and asked, "Would you like me to write you a letter of recommendation? You may leave now." It was meant as a generous offer, but in Kana's ears, the butler's voice was drowned out by the meowing. Layer upon layer, the shrill cries filled the whole room. The butler emphasized once more, "I'll write you a recommendation letter. You may go now." However, Kana did not run away. She lowered her head, letting the shadows hide her eyes, and replied in a calm but resolute voice, "I will continue working here. Even if I can no longer hear human voices, as long as I can read lips, it won't be a problem." The reason Kana stubbornly insisted on staying was because she still had a sick little sister bedridden at home, someone who desperately needed expensive medicine just to stay alive. Kana was ready to sacrifice everything for her younger sister. The butler studied Kana's unusual expression, then said, "In that case, Kana, I have a task for you." He pulled out a small, exquisitely crafted bottle from beneath the desk. "Since she insists on keeping a cat, then give this holy water to that cat." Kana stared at the bottle, terror and suppressed emotion plain in her eyes. Her gaze locked onto the bottle of holy water on the table, and without realizing it, she bit down hard on her finger. Holy water. If she could get holy water, her sister's illness would definitely be cured. Cold sweat broke out across her forehead. Her eyes were full of struggle and longing. "Want it?" A voice suddenly exploded inside Kana's mind, jolting her back to herself in alarm as she darted her eyes around. "If you want it, just take it." The three-eyed cat with leopard-patterned fur sat arrogantly on the windowsill. That voice echoed out from the darkness. "I'll tell you how to get it." Kana staggered a step backward. A monster. It was a monster. This was the very cat Miss Evangeline claimed she was raising. She ought to report this to the butler at once. If she could hand over this information, perhaps before leaving, she might even receive a reward. She stumbled toward the door, but the moment her fingers touched the freezing metal doorknob, her movement suddenly stopped. Could a mere reward really buy something as expensive as holy water? Kana thought of her frail little sister. For the child lying helplessly in bed, she couldn't stop working. No matter what fear she had to face, she absolutely could not back down. The hand gripping the doorknob slowly withdrew. For her sister, she had already vowed to give up everything and follow the monster's instructions. Kana secretly replaced that holy water with fake water. Evangeline didn't suspect the holy water in the slightest. Only Kana knew the truth in the depths of her heart. The reason the holy water failed to harm the cat was because Kana had tampered with it beforehand. In front of everyone, she acted as if she knew nothing and simply kept carrying out the other requests the monster gave her. Perhaps because Kana had indulged all of its bizarre whims, it began to restrain its strange appearance whenever it showed up in public. By keeping one eye shut, it successfully disguised itself as an ordinary cat. Kana no longer heard those mournful meows echoing in her ears either. Not only that, thanks to the exceptionally high wages that came with serving Evangeline, the money was more than enough to cover all living expenses, with plenty left over besides. It was all because of this high-paying job. On her way home from work, Kana could stop by the market and spend money on treats her sister loved. But what made Kana happiest of all was hearing the bright, cheerful call of Big Sis, along with the sight of her younger sister running out to greet her, clutching up her skirt. The little girl, once weak and sickly, had made a miraculous full recovery after drinking the holy water Kana had stolen. Kana spread her arms wide and hugged the girl tightly as she threw herself into her embrace. In this moment, all the hardship of serving that eerie cat and the terrifying young lady seemed to dissolve into nothing more than a nightmare that could easily be forgotten. To protect her sister's smile, Kana resolved to continue working at the mansion. No matter what she might face in the future, she would devote herself completely to serving those two masters, even if that young lady occasionally let out bizarre bursts of laughter while reading. Evangeline told herself that now she was a truly formidable transmigrator. She could even read this language. Since she had already mastered reading comprehension, she might as well take this opportunity to look through the original Evangeline's diary. Maybe there was even some summoning spell in there. If she could summon spirits or dragons with her own hands, that would be the true experience of overwhelming power. However, when she looked closely at the contents of the pages, she discovered that something was wrong. This was not Evangeline's diary at all. The first line on the page clearly read, March 9th, year 370. The first time I met Count Rohanzan. Evangeline was completely stunned. The current year was clearly 392. This diary was recording events from more than 20 years ago, and the deeper she read, the more it felt exactly like some melodramatic romance story. August 9th, year 370. That man proposed to me. Wait, was this Evangeline's mother's diary? August 19th, year 370. Father has confined me. He said that man proposed to me only for the wealth of the ducal house. But father hasn't even met him once. He said he truly loves me and that it wouldn't matter even if I had nothing at all. What a passionate romantic love story, Evangeline thought in amazement. April 2nd, year 371. I should have listened to father. I want to return to the Duke's territory. Evangeline frowned. So he really had married her for money, and after swallowing up the dowry, he immediately became cold and distant? She shook her head hard. This wasn't what she wanted to find out. The summoning spell. Where was the summoning spell? She flipped frantically through the pages, the paper rustling sharply against itself. Suddenly, all her movements froze. What is this? This translation isn't complete at all. She stared fixedly at the fragmented note titled How to Summon the Abyss. What exactly was this thing trying to tell her? How could grapes grow from a thorn bush? Was it trying to say that you plant rice and harvest red beans? What kind of nonsense was this? How was anyone supposed to do it like this? She thought it would be best to set it aside for now until she could fully understand it. After all, this thing couldn't just grow legs and run away. And yet it really did disappear. Evangeline sat down blankly on the carpet. The diary was still lying right there on the table, but the page containing that spell alone had vanished without a trace. Could it really disappear on its own? She hadn't even managed to decipher it yet, let alone perform any kind of summoning ritual. Standing quietly to one side, Kana grumbled inwardly, wondering what kind of madness this young lady was acting out now. Who came into my room yesterday? Kana thought for a moment, then calmly replied, if you mean yesterday's work, then it would probably have been Danao. Now that she thought about it, Danao truly hadn't shown his face at all today. That was very unusual. Had he done something wrong? After hearing that, Evangeline's lips curved into a cold, eerie smile. Something wrong? He had indeed done something wrong. And what he had done was an unforgivable crime. Where was that bastard now? He had actually dared to steal from her. She was definitely going to wring his neck. She would abuse her power to completely ruin him. Night fell. In a shabby wooden hut hidden in a secluded corner of the estate, chilling laughter rang out ceaselessly. Donald knelt on the icy floor. His fingers were stained with bright red liquid, and he was slowly and fervently smearing it. Across the floorboards, clutched tightly in his hand, was the torn page he had ripped from the diary. Danao let out a mad laugh. On the floor in front of him, a complex red magic circle had begun to take shape. In one corner of the magic circle, a figure was tightly bound with rope, collapsed on the ground. The person's mouth had been stuffed with cloth, allowing only muffled, despairing sobs to escape. The slums at midnight were noisy and chaotic. A drunk staggered down the street, swinging his bottle around and shouting, "Bring me more wine." A patrolling guard barked sternly, "Quiet down. Don't use being drunk as an excuse to make trouble in the middle of the night and force us to work even more." Beggars by the roadside held out their hands to passers-by. "Sir, please have mercy and spare coin." Two knights in uniform walked down the stone steps. One of them yawned and grumbled. "Honestly, what's with the commander? Why'd he send us to patrol a hellhole like this?" From a nearby alley came the sound of people arguing. "Hey, do you know who I am?" A poor painter walked by with his head lowered, sighing and muttering to himself, "Ugh, I can't find even the slightest bit of inspiration. I need to paint something soon." The sound of horse hooves came from far away and drew near. One knight suddenly stopped and looked toward the end of the road in confusion. A carriage sped past at full gallop. Seeing the family crest emblazoned on the carriage, the knight was astonished. Wait a second. Isn't that the carriage of the Rohinzen family? What are they doing in a place like the slums? The carriage jolted violently over the rough dirt road. Evangeline clutched her skirt tightly, her face full of anxiety as she urged repeatedly, "Faster, a little faster." She clenched her fists and gritted her teeth, cursing inwardly. "Just you wait, you despicable little thief. I have to get my spell back and then officially begin my journey to become the strongest person in this world." Evangeline swung her leg and delivered a fierce kick to the tightly shut wooden door. Inside, Kana was tightly bound with rough ropes, her mouth stuffed with thick white cloth so that only broken, stifled whimpers could escape. Why had things come to this? I was only waiting for my sister. A leopard-spotted tail flashed briefly through the crack in the door and disappeared. She had only meant to bring some snacks for the little cat she often saw. Big Sis told me not to wander outside at night, Kana told herself, but at the time, it was still daytime. It should have been fine, right? Completely off guard, the little girl rounded the corner, only to find that a tall figure had already been hiding in the shadows. The instant Kana passed by, a rough hand clamped over her mouth and nose. Donald let out a low, savage laugh. He looked down at the terrified Kana, the corners of his mouth twisting upward. "I've been waiting a long time, haven't I?" Donald yanked Kana's hair hard, forcing her face upward. In his other hand, he was gripping a sharp dagger. At last, the moment of sacrifice has come. Ordinary people might think this is some childish joke, but this spell is the real thing. Kana stared at the distorted, wrinkled face of the person before her. This madman dressed like a gentleman had already lost every shred of reason. Donald panted harshly in quick bursts. "Because my powers of observation have always far surpassed ordinary people." Kana stared into his bloodshot eyes. At this moment, he looked no different from someone possessed by a dark force. That young lady who clearly died suddenly came back to life. Aside from demons, who else could possibly perform a miracle like that? Those fools only know how to panic and make a fuss over a young girl, scared out of their wits. But I'm different, because I discovered the core truth. I know who summoned the power of darkness, and I also know how to call it here. Evangeline's maternal family was the illustrious house of Duke Hosakin. Count Rohinzen had always used the excuse that Evangeline had been sickly since childhood to extort enormous treatment expenses from the Duke's domain, some so vast they were almost unimaginable. But if Evangeline had truly died, that mountain of wealth would have vanished like foam. Therefore, the Count must have chosen a forbidden transaction in order to bring his daughter back to life. Donald let out a frenzied, twisted laugh. That damned old Count always pretends on the surface to be a kind man, but in truth he's nothing more than a trashy noble whose greed knows no bounds. I saw through all his filthy schemes long ago. He recalled the time he had been cleaning the study, when just one accidental glance at documents. But then I will become a true noble, 100,000 times nobler than that old Count Rohinzen. Kana let out choked, despairing sobs. Her whole body trembled violently from overwhelming fear. Donald began chanting that evil spell. "You who stand at the furthest end, use the blood of the innocent to stain this land red. Use your blood-soaked hands to draw a circle. Amidst vile gratitude, yearn for salvation." Kana groaned in pain. Her body writhed violently against the ropes. Donald gripped the dagger tightly, his face twisted with madness. He snapped, "That's enough, just stay still. I only need to borrow a little blood to suit the taste of the magic circle." Stop struggling. The stream of blood flowed down from the wound in a bright red trail. Donald grumbled impatiently. "I never intended to kill you. I'm only making a small cut. Shut your mouth and stop whining. Now, where had I gotten earlier? All right, let ripe grapes rot among the thorns. Let fruit bloom and bear on the sacrificial field." With each line of the incantation he recited, the wooden house, which had been silent as the grave, suddenly began to shake violently. "Revive in fear and worship. Welcome the angel of light. She will stride across this land and descend into the mortal world." A deafening explosion rang out. The wooden door was crushed into splinters by an unstoppable force. A blinding light instantly swallowed the entire room. The madness on Donald's face was gradually replaced by utter shock. Amid the dazzling light and swirling clouds of dust, a vague figure slowly took shape. Fear and worship. Evangeline stood silently before the shattered doorway, her long platinum hair fluttering in the radiant glow. "Welcome the angel of light. Stride across this land and descend into the mortal world." From somewhere unknown, the piercing yet melodious sound of a trumpet echoed through the still air. Evangeline looked at the scene before her and muttered inwardly, "Dear heavens above, that scared me to death. I only kicked it because I was mad. Who would have thought this door was so flimsy to make such a huge commotion like this? The door must have been completely rotten already." Evangeline collected herself and turned her gaze toward the two people in the room. No, more important than worrying about that, she'd come here to catch the thief who stole her spell page. But what exactly was this situation? Had that thief now evolved into a kidnapper? An extortionist? After seeing clearly that the little girl collapsed on the floor, Kana cried out in panic. "Kana!" Evangeline looked over at Kana in surprise. Oh, so this was someone Kana knew? That man called Donald had quite some nerve. Laying hands on someone Kana knew. A friend she had only just grown close to. She clenched the fabric of her skirt tightly. She absolutely would not let him get away so easily. First, she had to find a way to make him move away from that girl. Donald collapsed to the ground and stammered, "Evangeline." "Rowan Zen." Evangeline lowered her gaze to him with an expressionless face. She thought to herself, what's wrong with this guy? Why is he trembling so badly? Is he frightened because his crime has been exposed? Taking advantage of the moment, she asked, "Was it you who called me here?" Donald stared blankly. "You? You're the master of that summoning circle? Good. Just keep all his attention focused on me like this." She raised her chin slightly and answered in a cold, decisive voice, "That's right. And that is exactly why I came to find you." Evangeline extended a hand toward Donald. "Tell me your desire. I will fulfill whatever wish you have longed for." Of course, she only wanted to probe what exactly he was trying to say. Donald seemed to freeze in place, his breathing growing ragged. "Help me." He suddenly raised his head. A flame of greed seemed ready to erupt madly in his eyes. "Help me become unimaginably rich. Rich enough to live the rest of my life in absolute luxury, surrounded by silk and splendor." She thought, just as I expected, this was the most classic reason people turned to theft and kidnapping. The problem was that she hadn't brought a single coin with her. How was she supposed to handle this situation? Evangeline decided to bluff her way through it for now. She raised her hand once again, her fingers tracing an arc in the air. "Wealth? HM? Very well. Then would you like to become the next Count Rowanzen? I will make you a count." Donald stood motionless in the darkness. His eyes, shaken too deeply, seemed to have lost focus. Seeing Donald fall silent, Evangeline couldn't help feeling a little anxious. Damn it, why isn't he answering? Did I overact? Becoming the groom who inherits the title sounded convincing enough, didn't it? Of course, as long as the hostage was safe, she would immediately play dumb afterward and throw him into a dungeon first, then deal with the rest later. Donald lowered his head, muttering and letting out a few indistinct groans. "A count. That's right. I like that proposal very much." Donald slowly raised his head. "To personally seize the position of that wretched count, that has endless appeal to me." Ha ha ha. Donald suddenly spun around. His face was filled with warped, ecstatic delight. "Excellent." He raised the dagger in his hand high. "Then here now, let us complete this transaction." Evangeline swung her arm with force and struck Donald hard on the back of the neck. Donald cried out in pain, his body losing balance, before pitching forward onto the ground. The sharp dagger slipped from his sleeve and clattered across the cold floor. Actually, should I have hit the back of his neck like in the movies instead of hitting the back of his head? What if he suddenly jumps back up and counterattacks? He really isn't getting up again, right? Evangeline looked at Donald, lying unconscious on the ground. It seemed her luck wasn't bad. She'd struck a vital spot by sheer chance. Kana rushed to Kana, who had collapsed on the floor. Kana! She knelt beside the girl, her trembling hands trying to undo the coarse ropes. Wait a moment, I'll untie you right away. What do I do? They're tied too tightly. Why can't I get them loose? Tears swam in Kana's eyes. This should never have happened. Evangeline walked over gently and said, "Move aside, Kana." Kana looked up and replied in a trembling voice, "And my lady." Evangeline crouched down and took the tightly bound rope from Kana's hands. "If you keep shaking like that, you won't be able to undo a single knot." With the smooth movements of Evangeline's fingers, the taut ropes were loosened in an instant and fell to the floor with a rattle. Evangeline lowered her eyes to Kana. "It's all right now. You're safe." Kana lunged forward and pulled Kana into a tight embrace. "Kana, are you all right? How did you end up being taken here? I told you not to wander around outside on your own. You only just started recovering." Kana leaned weakly into Kana's arms and whispered, "I'm sorry, sister. I didn't think I'd get caught by someone like him. I was only waiting for you to come back." Kana held Kana tightly and whispered, "I'm sorry too." "Kana, thank goodness you're all right. Thank heaven I wasn't too late." Evangeline stood off to the side, watching the two of them embrace. So they really were sisters. That's good. She wanted to go over and hug them too, but if an infamous villainess like Evangeline started sniffling and crying along with them, the scene would be unbearably awkward. Rather than crying with them, it was better to offer practical help. She stepped forward, looked at Kana, and asked, "Your name is Kana, right? What should we do with Donald? Lock him in a dungeon forever?" She tilted her head slightly. "Or perhaps, now that I look closely, there's a wound on his neck." Donald, who had been lying collapsed on the ground, suddenly twitched, his body struggling as he tried to rise. A bright smile suddenly bloomed across Kana's face, but looked strangely eerie. "I will like that very much." At that very moment, Donald reached out and grabbed the dagger that had fallen to the floor. Realizing something was wrong, Evangeline turned around. In the darkness, the blade flashed with a cold gleam. Kana widened her eyes in horror and stretched out a hand, screaming, "My lady!" Fresh blood instantly sprayed through the air. Drawing a dazzling arc, Evangeline froze in place. Donald lay on his back on the cold floor. Blood rapidly spread out from his throat. What just happened? Did he stab himself in the neck? Was it because he didn't want to pay for his crimes, so he decisively took his own life? Seriously, the thoughts of criminals like this are impossible to understand. She had intended to let him face the judgment of justice and the law. She turned toward Kana, who were standing nearby. "Sorry. In the end, he still died." Kana lowered her head and replied softly, "It's all right. This is enough for me." The girl clasped her hands before her chest. "Thank you for saving me, my lady." Saving someone really does feel wonderful. Warmth filled Evangeline's heart. But wasn't this warmth a little too hot? Kana, standing beside her, looked behind Evangeline in alarm. "My lady, it's burning over there. Shouldn't we leave quickly?" Evangeline went rigid, eyes wide with shock. "I knew it. When she saw all those sparkling light effects earlier, she thought it was just the flashy staging of some romantic fantasy story. Who would have guessed it wasn't an effect at all? It was real fire. Wait, the fireplace definitely wasn't lit. So why was this house suddenly on fire? How could a place like this catch fire for no reason? It made no sense at all. Could it be that guy? Could it be that after stealing her spell page, he had summoned a fire spirit or something similar? Was the heroine's overpowered exclusive ability really so easily snatched away by some servant? She remembered how painstakingly she had drawn that summoning circle. She'd even accidentally gotten a splinter in her finger, gritted through the pain until blood came out, and in the end, because she didn't know the correct pronunciation of the spell, she couldn't summon anything at all. Now that spell page had surely turned to ash in the flames. She stared blankly at the building being swallowed by fire. Was her invincible, cheat-enabled life really just going to vanish like this? Roost stain walls, air thick with the stench of damp mold, a bowl of cold soup, and a narrow, hard bed. There was only one window in the room, barely as wide as two hands placed side by side. That was Kana's only connection to the outside world and the entire boundary of her world as well. Kana had been sickly and frail since birth. It had been an extremely difficult delivery. Her mother, after giving her life, had also left this world forever to afford the expensive medicine. Her father worked himself day and night until he finally collapsed from exhaustion. Now that crushing burden had fallen onto her older sister's shoulders, Kana bore it all, alone, supporting this crumbling household on the verge of collapse. Yet no matter how much their family exhausted their lives for her, Kana's health never improved. That illness was like a withered tree taking root in her bones, constantly draining the life around it. If only she had been able to tell her sister sooner to give up this hopeless struggle, perhaps it would have been a release for both of them. But Kana wanted to live. No matter how wretched and pitiful this life was, she still wanted to cling desperately to that faint sliver of light. Kana called that stubbornness hope. Kana had once pointed to that tiny little window and said, "Kana, do you see those people outside? I believe that one day you too will be able to walk freely like them. I promise you, that day will come." And so that cramped, suffocating little window came to feel very special in Kana's eyes. She imagined herself joining that flow of people. She clung tightly to the hope her sister had planted in her until one day, a figure she had never seen before appeared outside the window. Soon after, a miracle descended upon Kana. Kana rushed into the room holding an exquisite vial of medicine, shouting, "Look, Kana, Lady Evangeline heard about your circumstances and specially bestowed this holy water. From now on, you won't have to suffer anymore, Kana." However, when Kana looked at that so-called holy water, the first emotion that surged in her heart was not joy nor happiness, but anger. Her father and sister had nearly thrown away their whole lives for her. And now, just because of the pity of one highborn woman, all that suffering was going to end so easily, just because of this one bottle of water? That irrational resentment turned wholly toward Evangeline, toward the woman who had bestowed that holy water. And yet that existence, who should have been called an angel, descended before the girl once more. What should we do with Donald? Lock him in a dungeon forever? Donald sprang up from the ground, gripping the dagger in both hands. Under the watch of countless giant crimson eyes, he madly plunged the blade into his own throat. Fresh blood sprayed into the air, painting a dazzling arc. Evangeline tilted her head, looking at the corpse collapsed in a pool of blood, and said, "Sorry." In the end, he still died. Kana folded her hands before her chest, wearing a relieved smile, as if a burden had finally been lifted, and replied, "It's all right. This is enough for me. Taking one's own life is an unforgivable sin. For those who recklessly cast away the life bestowed by the gods, there is absolutely no mercy. There is only one place that accepts such souls. The fires of hell descended to welcome this deeply sinful Donald." Kana stood on the street, blankly watching the house being devoured by flames. Before that brilliant heat, it felt like her sister's warm embrace, and also like the brightest midday sunlight of summer, giving the girl a sense of comfort and peace she had never known. Beneath the distant bell tower, a man in a splendid cloak came to a halt. He looked at the blazing fire ahead, his brows knitting tightly. What kind of fire was that? The flames raged fiercely in the center of town, black smoke billowing into the sky. A crowd had gathered all around, and the clamor of gossip rose without end. Evangeline stood in the middle of the crowd with her arms crossed, coldly watching the chaotic scene. People were starting to gather. Quite a spectacle, really. A knight shouted loudly, "Everyone back off. Do not approach the scene." Another knight added, "Make way. The night order has arrived." It seems someone had gone to report it. As expected of a romantic fantasy world, their uniforms were absurdly gorgeous. Especially that man. He stood out the most among all of them. Was he coming straight toward her? Moreover, Evangeline froze on the spot. This man was ridiculously handsome. His level of attractiveness was enough to make her feel almost delusional. Gabriel stopped in front of Evangeline and bent slightly as he said, "Apologies for the disturbance. I am Gabriel, commander of the Polaro's Night Order." Evangeline observed the man before her. In this world, the crown prince was a middle-aged man, and there was no such title as a northern Grand Duke. Could this man be the male lead? Black hair and a face like that. He had to be the male lead. Gabriel looked at Evangeline intently and said, "May I ask why a young lady such as yourself has appeared in a place like this?" The crowd let out astonished murmurs. Keeping a cold expression, Gabriel continued, "This does not seem like a suitable place for a stroll." Evangeline looked at him and sighed inwardly. It seems I really do look exactly like a villain. The moment he saw me, he already started suspecting me. Kana instinctively stepped in front of Evangeline. Kana cried out in alarm. "Kana, what are you doing? It's dangerous here." That knight is questioning Lady Evangeline, looking at the small back spread protectively before her. Evangeline felt a surge of warmth in her heart. She was truly moved, but she couldn't hide behind the back of a child who had already suffered through so much. Evangeline gently patted Kana on the shoulder. "A stroll, you say? I was only looking for someone. The owner of that burning house just so happens to be my servant. He was indeed inside, but he's already dead, so there's no need to concern yourselves with him. In any case, death alone was too light a punishment for him." Gabriel fell silent. "Please explain the situation in more detail, if you would." Evangeline looked at him, thinking inwardly, if he's acting in an official capacity, then he'll definitely have to write a report for his superiors. But where was she supposed to begin? If she said Donald had summoned a fire spirit and then killed himself, would he believe her? Just as Evangeline was still hesitating, Kana suddenly stepped forward and said loudly, "Let me explain. That servant, Donald, who works for Milady here, kidnapped me. My older sister came to ask Milady for help, so she came here to save me." Gabriel sank into thought, letting out a faint hum as if pondering it. With a resolute expression, Kana added, "I didn't see him escape outside, so he must be dead." Evangeline stood to one side, observing the situation. Kana's version of the story sounded far more convincing. Even he seemed to believe it immediately. Wait, something's not right. A black-haired male lead, along with a kind and strong-willed red-haired girl with wavy hair. This was insane. So Kana was actually the heroine. That kidnapping was originally supposed to be the key plot point where the male lead saved the heroine. But because of her own interference, she had completely ruined their first meeting. Evangeline nearly spiraled. Was I supposed to just stand by and watch back then? No. Even if they were only characters in a book, she couldn't just watch the girl suffer. With a serious face, Kana looked at Gabriel and asked, "You don't have any other questions, do you? Milady is tired now. We have to go." Evangeline cried inwardly. Good grief. Just look at the heroine's attitude toward the male lead. This was all her fault. It really had turned into that transmigration trope, where the villainous supporting character, Gabriel, stood still where he was, silently watching Evangeline's retreating figure. At first, Gabriel had thought a stone statue was standing in the middle of the crowd. Although the appearance of such an exquisitely crafted sculpture in this slum was nearly unimaginable. The reason he hadn't recognized her as human at first glance was because from that existence, he couldn't sense anything that could be called vitality at all. When he saw that existence, which ought to have been utterly devoid of life, turn around, look at him with syrup-red eyes, and then let human words spill from those crimson lips, he felt a shock unlike anything he had ever experienced, almost losing the ability to speak. Even when Gabriel forced himself to remain calm enough to speak with that woman, he could still feel that she looked at everyone in this world as though they were ants. He couldn't feel even the slightest warmth from her. However, that woman had undeniably shown interest in Kana. Perhaps because she was under the attention of some inhuman entity, that little girl's state didn't look normal either. The blind reverence and fervor she displayed made her look exactly like a fanatical cult believer. One subordinate stepped up to Gabriel and quietly reminded him, "Commander, about the fire. We hadn't even started putting it out, but it went out on its own. And it didn't spread at all. It only burned down that one house." Gabriel frowned and asked, "What do you mean by that?" The pink-haired holy knight moved deeper into the ruins. "That's not all. Please come and see this for yourself, sir. We discovered a dead body at the scene of the fire." But at that moment, the knight standing nearby murmured in amazement, "It's truly unbelievable. This has to be a coincidence, right? He looks exactly like an angel." Those wings forged from charred ashes hadn't even had the chance to flap before they began collapsing and crumbling apart, falling into a bottomless abyss. The painter's brush flew across the canvas with hurried scraping sounds. He whispered with a fanatical look, "This is a divine calling. This is the mission bestowed upon me by the heavens." Sweat poured from him, and bloodshot eyes gleamed red. "I have to. I must finish this painting. This holy angel, above that sacred head. A halo was casting a faint glow, but that light looked so weak, as though it could be snuffed out by darkness at any moment, exactly like a candle on the verge of burning out. Jim had once been a painter. He had once been praised as a rising talent. But because his works didn't suit noble tastes, he quickly fell from grace. Now, he could only live off his wife. That was why he desperately longed to finish a masterpiece as soon as possible. On a late-night street, Jim staggered along. He couldn't find even a shred of inspiration. I have to paint something soon. He wandered the streets aimlessly, hoping he might accidentally come across a spark of inspiration. At that moment, Jim stopped in his tracks. He had discovered a strange fire. The blaze, burning as brilliantly as sunlight, gradually died away, replaced instead by deathly silence. He discovered a holy angel, nothing more than a corpse now. Jim hurriedly covered his mouth and nose, his eyes overflowing with shock and extreme fanaticism. Without a moment's hesitation, he immediately turned and ran home at full speed, snatched up his brush, dipped its tip in a thick paint, and frantically slashed it across the canvas. This is revelation. This is my divine calling. I must finish this painting, but something was still missing. It felt like something was lacking. With these paints alone, I simply can't capture that essence. What am I supposed to do? What in the world should I do? His gaze frantically searched through his box of painting tools, finally stopping on a sharp palette knife. Jim stared at its blade. The reflection showed a ferocious face, the corners of his mouth twisted in a mad smile. He slowly reached out and gripped the handle. The sound of the sharp blade plunging into flesh echoed through the room. Fresh blood immediately splattered out. Dark red liquid ran down past his ankle, pooling into a puddle of blood on the floor. Yet Jim seemed not to feel any pain at all. He even hummed a cheerful tune. The palette in his hand had been stained red with fresh blood. He dipped the brush into that warm, real color and continued madly, smearing it across the canvas. On the quiet street, the clear clatter of horse hooves rang out. "Shall I arrange a room for you in the manor?" On the carriage ride back, Evangeline broke the silence. She looked at Kana sitting beside her. "If you go back home, you'll surely feel scared. I will take care of you." At that moment, the one Evangeline was asking for an opinion from was Kana, not Kana. Kana sat to one side, her fingers unconsciously clutching the folds of her skirt. If it were left to her, she would definitely have told Kana to refuse the invitation. But she feared that if she acted rashly, she might accidentally offend this cold, noble lady. What frightened her even more was the horrific image of Donald's miserable death, which still remained vividly in her mind. And what made Kana feel the deepest chill down her spine was Kana's strangely satisfied attitude toward that revolting death. Kana turned around and asked Evangeline excitedly, "Can my sister stay with me too?" Evangeline stroked the three-eyed cat in her lap. "Of course." Kana immediately beamed. "I want to choose the room myself too." A powerful, unfamiliar feeling surged up inside Kana. She had never seen her younger sister be so close to this young lady. Evangeline gave a slight nod and said, "Whatever you like, as long as you're happy." Kana had always been bold since childhood, but her current state truly seemed abnormal. Could it be because Miss Evangeline had saved her, so she had completely opened her heart? But the butler knew Kana had been ill. If he saw her moving around so briskly now, he might discover that she had stolen holy water. Kana turned to Evangeline and asked, "Milady, can I live in the room right below yours?" Kana's eyes widened in terror at those words. She grabbed Kana's shoulders and cried out, "But that's the room where the late countess used to stay." Evangeline replied calmly, "She's already passed away. That room has no owner now. It's fine. The furniture is all there already, so moving in directly would be very comfortable. I'll speak to the Count about it." Kana shrank back to her seat, lowering her head and biting her lip. She only hoped that before the Count threw the sisters out, the butler absolutely wouldn't catch sight of them. Beneath the hanging crystal chandelier, countless gems atop the great hall reflected faint light into the dim room. Lying on a large bed, Kana turned and said to Kana beside her, "Sis, I can hear Milady walking around upstairs." Kana lay stiffly in the blankets and replied in confusion, "Really? I can't hear anything at all." Kana smiled faintly. "Is that so? Anyway, I really like this room. This bed is big enough for the two of us to lie side by side. All right, did you see the cat Milady keeps? I met that cat before when I was at home. It feels like fate, and in the end, it became Milady's pet." Hearing her younger sister speak, Kana's body unconsciously tensed up. "Kana, That cat is a monster. Kana reached out and took Kana's hand. Sis, thank you for coming to save me today. I was really scared. Kana squeezed her sister's hand tightly. She felt guilty for having, for one brief moment, found her younger sister unfamiliar. Surely it was because Kana still hadn't recovered from the fright, so she was deliberately acting calm. No matter how strange Kana's behavior might be, in the end, she was still only her lovely little sister, the one she needed to protect. Evangeline held a quill pen, writing noisily across the page. From now on, my goal is to become Kana's closest friend. In those villainous reincarnation stories, I ought to try winning over the male lead's heart. But no matter how handsome he is, maybe because he's only a character in a book, I don't feel any romantic emotions at all. These so-called fantasies of love have absolutely no appeal for me, so I have to focus all my attention on the heroine instead. This is the true shortcut to escaping my tragic fate. From now on, no matter what happens, I will protect Kana properly. To achieve this goal, she decided to write a letter to the father who was away all year round. As long as she obtained his permission, Kana and Kana could rightfully stay in the bedroom directly beneath hers. His light stayed on until late last night, but the butler said he had already gone off on business or something. Although the letter was finished, Evangeline fell into thought. She knew this story's setting very well. Her father, the Count, was cold by nature, and even somewhat disliked his daughter. If she made a straightforward request, he would certainly reject it mercilessly. In that case, step 1, tear out a page from Mother's diary. Evangeline gets scolded by the Count. Step 2, fold the letter and send it together with that page. Step 3, receive a reply. The Count writes back, do as you like. From now on, for such trivial matters, ask the butler directly. Don't write to me again. Just like that, the issue was solved as easily as turning over a hand. Now she could finally keep the two sisters by her side and make her plan proceed smoothly. The three of them were enjoying a rare, leisurely afternoon. Raising her teacup, Evangeline thought to herself, as long as I can successfully escape this vicious fate, I can live a carefree and joyful life and fully enjoy this long-awaited existence. However, that peace was quickly shattered. Gabriel sat across from Evangeline, wearing a grave expression, his hands clasped tightly on his knees. I am very sorry to have to tell you this, but, milady, you may be accused of using improper means to fabricate the cause of Donald's death. Evangeline was stunned. The smile on her lips froze instantly, and her whole body turned rigid. What kind of development was this? What had happened just before that was this? Kana hurried into the room and said, Milady, that knight from before has sent a letter. He says he will be coming to visit shortly. Sitting at the desk, Evangeline took the letter. Let me see. In the letter, he says there seems to be a problem with Donald's case. We need to talk. Kana, standing nearby, spoke with some dissatisfaction. Didn't we already finish giving our statements back then? Why is he coming again now? Looking at the letter paper, Evangeline replied, maybe while writing his report. He came up with some doubts and wants to confirm them again. Or perhaps he just wants to see the heroine, Kana. Kana folded her arms and muttered, I didn't expect him to keep clinging to Milady like this. Kana, somewhat helpless, advised Kana. You shouldn't talk about Sir Knight like that. I will receive him properly, and by the way, show him just how close Kana and I are. I also have to make him see that I fully support the relationship between the two of them. Maybe I can even get a tiny share in their happy ending. Evangeline smiled. Kana, please prepare some elegant letter paper for me. I need to write a reply to Sir Gabriel. In the drawing room, Gabriel sat upright on the sofa. It is a pleasure to see you again, Sir Gabriel. It has been a long time. Evangeline raised her teacup. If you are worried about Kana's condition, would you like me to call the child here? Gabriel set down his teacup and replied calmly. If you're referring to the kidnapped girl from that time, I don't think she was seriously injured. Evangeline was dumbfounded. What? What kind of male lead was he supposed to be? Not seriously injured? Was that some kind of joke? She recalled the scar on Kana's neck. Every time she saw that scar, both she and Kana felt heartbroken. She had originally planned to get some holy water to heal that blemish, but Kana insisted on keeping it, so they could only swallow their tears and leave the scar on the girl's neck. Gabriel leaned his elbows on his knees, his expression turning solemn. The reason I came here today in person is because there is something I need to hear your opinion on, milady. Though I am very sorry to inform you of this, milady, you are at risk of being accused of involvement in fabricating Donald's death through improper means. Gabriel pulled a stack of documents from inside his coat. Please take a look at this. Evangeline stared at the sheet of paper Gabriel pushed toward her. That was Good heavens, what on earth was this thing? Evangeline drew in a sharp breath. On the paper was an extremely twisted figure. The artistic skill of the person who had drawn it was catastrophically bad. Somewhat awkwardly, Gabriel explained, "This is a sketch I drew myself to illustrate the situation. So although it may look a little unsightly, I hope you will forgive it." Evangeline completely froze. He drew it himself? Unbelievable. A man with such a beautiful face, yet with drawing skills even worse than a kindergartner's. Was this what they called the law of balance? Pointing at the picture, Gabriel asked, "Looking at it like this, doesn't he resemble an angel?" Without changing her expression, Evangeline stared at the paper. "I'm sorry, but no matter how I look at it, he only resembles a moth." Regaining his serious expression, Gabriel said, "When Donald's lifeless body was discovered at the crime scene, he was in exactly this state. Perhaps because of that, the people who saw the body with their own eyes started spreading rumors that Donald had actually received the blessing of the gods." Evangeline listened with her eyes wide. What? Why would Donald receive the blessing of the gods? He was the one who kidnapped their Kana. In the end, because he didn't want to face his crimes, he had taken his own life to escape. He was obviously a criminal. With a grave expression, Gabriel replied, "Honestly, if it were only a rumor passed by word of mouth, it would have been quickly suppressed. But a painter recreated that scene and donated the painting to the temple. So the matter completely spiraled out of control. Within the temple, the existence of that painting caused enormous shock and controversy. Some even proposed that Donald's lifeless body should be brought into the temple for worship. Because of that, the higher authorities have taken special interest and ordered the case reopened to ensure that Donald's death was not a wrongful one. The crux of the matter is that if the authorities officially acknowledge that Donald received the blessing of the gods, then, on the other hand, Miss Rohanzin, you will be charged with using improper methods to fabricate his death." Evangeline clutched the collar at her chest. What was this supposed to mean? It was as if this world were deliberately driving her into a corner, determined to force her to bear the crime of a villainess no matter what. Gabriel looked at her intently and asked, "Miss Rohanzin, I must ask you this. Everything you told me before, was it all the truth?" Even the male lead had started to doubt her. How should I answer now? If I change my testimony at this point, wouldn't that only make me more suspicious? She remembered how she had secretly asked Kana and Kana whether spiritual entities existed in this world. But the people here seemed completely unaware of such a concept. In these circumstances, if she said that Donald had summoned a spirit entity back then, would anyone believe her? Then let me ask you in return, Sir Gabriel, do you think I lied? Sitting on the sofa, Gabriel answered solemnly, "I do not believe. Donald received the blessing of the gods, but the substance inside him had an extremely bizarre form. That too was an undeniable truth." Gabriel looked at Evangeline. A trace of resolve showed in his eyes. "I want to help you." Evangeline froze. She tilted her head slightly, then softly repeated it as if she could hardly believe it. "You say you want to help me?" Gabriel replied in a calm, yet decisive tone. "Yes. I presumptuously wish to offer you my assistance." What was with that expression? Was he embarrassed? As a seasoned reader of romantic fantasy novels, based on her many years of judgment, Evangeline was certain of it. This was absolutely a glaring green flag. This was the classic motif. The villainess, desperately struggling to escape her fate, only for the male lead to fall in love with her in the process. Hopelessly, irrevocably in love. Evangeline felt a headache coming on. She had thought she already understood every formula of villainous transmigration stories. Who would have thought she had still underestimated the power of this genre? How foolish. Without even clearly seeing her own circumstances, was she really supposed to fall in love with the male lead? But he was only a fictional character, while she was a living, breathing person. This was honestly a bit. "But I have absolutely no interest in you," Evangeline answered. Gabriel responded evenly. "Yes, I'd already guessed that Lady Rohanzin has no interest in people. But that does not matter. I'm simply curious about you." Evangeline screamed inwardly. "Enough already. Stop using these emotionally charged romantic close-up shots. And someone make those flower petals floating around stop too." This man had sugar water flowing through his veins. not even syrup anymore. This was unbearable. This romantic fantasy world was terrifying. Evangeline forced herself to calm down. Actually, when I first went looking for Donald, it wasn't because Kana had been kidnapped. It was because he stole my painting and ran away. It was while chasing him that I discovered Kana tied up there. She pointed at the circle in the drawing. It was this circular pattern. It was right there at the scene. Could you explain to me what exactly this pattern is? Gabriel answered sternly, "It is a summoning circle." He pressed on. Then what was he using it to summon? Evangeline fell silent for a moment before speaking slowly. "If the people here would rather believe in gods than spirits, forget it. Let them believe what they want." Lowering her eyes slightly, she replied in a flat voice, "I think it was probably used to summon an angel, or something similar. I want to help you." The moment he finished speaking, the space around them sank into a deathly silence. Before Evangeline's eyes, it seemed as if all things in existence grew cautious. The flock of birds outside the window suddenly stiffened in midair, then dropped straight down like kites with their strings cut. The flower petals, swaying in the wind, abruptly stopped and shrank back into tightly closed buds. The faintly echoing symphony suddenly fell silent. It was as if the world had been muted, leaving only the sound of a heartbeat echoing in the empty air. Evangeline lowered her gaze slightly. "You want to help me?" She rested one hand against her cheek, looking down at the man before her from above. A hint of mockery entered her voice. What a foolish gentleman, to be this incapable of distinguishing his own position. "I have no interest in you whatsoever." Gabriel completely agreed with that. Did humans ever care about a swarm of ants crawling through the garden? The fact that she did not crush him on a whim was perhaps already the greatest mercy. Even if Evangeline were to trample him the way one would crush those ants, it absolutely would not be a sin, because she would never even bother herself with his existence. Evangeline was angry only because some nameless intruder had broken into her home, yet she still straightened her back proudly and said, "I am simply curious about you," even if in a negative way. The mere fact that he had managed to stir even a sliver of emotion in Evangeline was, in itself, an enormous encouragement. It was like witnessing a flower blooming on the trunk of a withered, soulless tree that should never have been able to sprout at all. A breathtaking flower had bloomed like a miracle. Gabriel stood silently on the gravel path. He gazed thoughtfully at the giant tree towering before him, its canopy covering the sky. A pink-haired holy knight approached. "Commander, what are you looking at so intently?" "Goodness, that tree is astonishingly large. Can cherry blossom trees normally grow this huge?" Just as Raphael said, Gabriel had no idea what kind of fertilizer had been used, but it was a tree that had grown with abnormal luxuriance. When Gabriel focused and looked again, the figure that had been lounging among the flowering branches had completely vanished. Could everything he had just seen have been nothing more than an illusion woven by falling petals? A carriage rattled forward along the road. A butterfly landed on the ground. The carriage sped past, and the wheel mercilessly crushed and tore apart that brilliant little life completely. Inside the carriage, Gabriel sat in silence. Evangeline's delusional arrogance. There was nothing amusing about it at all. Gabriel lowered his eyes and sank into thought. Could it be because of the rumor he had heard before coming to visit the Count's territory? While gathering information on Evangeline, he had once heard the story of a priest. That priest claimed he had personally witnessed Evangeline come back to life. However, the temple had no record whatsoever of Evangeline's funeral. On the contrary, the priest who should have been responsible for that funeral had hanged himself. No suicide note had been left at the scene. The only records showed that the priest had secretly been preaching to the families of those who had taken their own lives and been abandoned by the temple in order to extort money from them. There were even rumors that his death had been divine punishment. Raphael looked at Gabriel and spoke. "Commander, I remembered the note found at the scene, and that line, 'Survive the flames. Return in fear and worship. You must welcome the angel of light. He will stride across this land and descend upon the human world.'" What does that sentence actually mean? Gabriel fell into thought. An angel. This is our clearest clue so far. As for that so-called summoning circle, I have heard that this kind of dark art, used to summon some being in order to fulfill one's wishes, was once very popular in the past. Until later, the sorcerers who practiced such dark arts were subjected to a large-scale purge. Gabriel looked out the window. I do not clearly remember when it was anymore. Perhaps when I was very young, or even earlier than that. "Raphael, have you ever heard of dark arts Before he could finish, a sharp scream suddenly rang out from outside the carriage. The coachman yanked hard on the reins. The horse neighed in terror. The entire carriage shook violently. Raphael hurried to steady himself and asked in concern, "Commander, are you all right?" Once the carriage finally came to a stop, Raphael pushed open the door and stepped out. He shouted at the still-shaken coachman, "Didn't you say you were very skilled at driving?" The coachman bowed repeatedly in apology, his voice trembling as he explained, "My deepest apologies, sir. Just now, a cat suddenly rushed out from the shadows. Not far away, a three-eyed cat crouched silently. Its eerie eyes glimmered in the darkness. Gabriel stepped out of the carriage. My subordinate and I are unharmed. It is all right. Better that I suffer a few minor scratches than run into someone else." Raphael patted his chest. "Commander!" My heart nearly jumped out of my body. Gabriel said nothing, only stood there in silence. The coachman soothed the frightened black horse. "Easy now. Calm down." Raphael looked at Gabriel. "I think it should be safe to get back in the carriage now. Commander, let us go." Just as they had started speaking about dark arts, the carriage had nearly overturned. Was that really only a coincidence? In the distance, the convent looked solemn and tranquil in the evening glow. A broom swept across the ground with a rustling sound, gathering dried leaves together. Several nuns had gathered beneath the cloister in the courtyard to clean. One of them lowered her voice and asked, "Have you heard about the holy painting hanging in the grand sanctuary?" "Oh, that one." Another nun propped her chin on her hand, looking thoughtful. "I heard that painting is like a gatekeeper. It can filter out the insincere believers, right? I heard a young lady fainted after seeing the painting and even dreamed of the sun god. There are even unbelievable rumors going around within the Polaro's Night Order. A knight named Michael stood before the painting for a very long time, almost unable to tear himself away from it." The nun lowered her voice mysteriously and added, "I also heard that the high priest personally sent a gift of thanks to the artist, along with endless praise." Another nun widened her eyes in astonishment. "What? Really?" The nun nodded firmly. "Why would I lie to you? They say the high priest thought extremely highly of it. Just how beautiful must that painting be? I really want a chance to see it for myself at least once." She turned her head toward the other end of the corridor. "Sister Daisy, where are you going?" Daisy replied quietly, "To see Priest Belga. I heard he was looking for me." The nun's expression shifted slightly when she heard that. She quickly moved closer to Daisy and warned her in a low voice, "Good heavens, Sister Daisy. You've only recently come to this convent, so maybe you don't know. Absolutely do not have any contact with him. That man is a degenerate, notorious throughout this convent. He specifically targets newcomers." Daisy stopped where she was. A chill ran down her spine. She lowered her head, unease and heaviness showing in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me this." Inside the convent library, towering bookshelves reached all the way to the ceiling. Daisy stood alone in the empty reading room, holding a dim oil lamp in her hand. That man might send someone to her room, so it would be better to tidy the book room and stay here until morning. She had finally managed to escape the monster wearing the young lady Evangeline's skin. She did not want to invite any more trouble. The flame inside the oil lamp flickered softly, making tiny crackling sounds. Carrying the lamp, Daisy slowly pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into the dark corridor. She halted and looked ahead warily. Noon, two men in priestly robes were blocking her path. One of them said coldly, "We clearly told you that Priest Belga is looking for you. Why are you still strolling around here so leisurely? Come with us at once." Heavy footsteps echoed through the gloomy corridor. "Once Priest Belga gets hold of this girl, enough," his companion replied. "Very likely. After all, he's extremely fond of women." Hearing their conversation, Daisy's heart filled with doubt and fear. What was going on? Priest Belga had not called for her at all. Were these two planning to take her away on their own? She tried to resist, but one of them roughly shoved her hard. "When Priest Belga's condition improves, we'll naturally let you go." Along with that indifferent declaration, the heavy door slammed shut. Daisy was thrown into the room by a powerful shove and crashed onto the cold floor, groaning in pain as she struggled to get up. But then strange muttering sounds rang out beside her ear. Daisy looked up in horror toward the source of the sound. In the dark corner of the room, an overturned bottle of ink lay quietly on the floor. Is this it? I think this is it. I have to complete the missing part, the missing part. Priest Belga was kneeling on the ground. Both his hands were covered in thick black liquid as he frantically smeared it across the floor. I have to complete it right now. Daisy dropped to the floor, her pupils shrinking violently in overwhelming terror. The instant she saw that summoning circle, the reason she had been forced here no longer mattered. Her memory returned to that day at the Rohan Zen estate. That summoning circle drawn in syrup. Those countless eyes. In Daisy's heart, that overpowering fear surged up once more. Hadn't she sacrificed everything in order to escape all of this? She had to stop that summoning circle from being completed, no matter what. No matter who her opponent was, she could not back down. Daisy forcefully lifted a heavy stone statue. Even if she had to kill him, she let out a shout and smashed it down with all her strength. A harsh sound of shattering followed as fragments of stone flew everywhere. Hey, I heard something. What do you think that was? Let's just pretend we didn't hear anything. Ignore her. Now that we've locked that woman inside, she'll naturally understand what's going to happen. Daisy collapsed onto the floor, panting. Sweat rolled down her cheeks. The obese body dropped heavily onto the floor with a thud. Syrup gushed from the wound, wriggling across the icy floor. How had this happened? What had she done? She had only wanted to stop him, only wanted him to stop. What would happen if she were caught? Killing a clergyman inside the sanctuary was a burden heavier than any other crime. It was not merely the taking of a life, but blasphemy against those favored by the gods. If she were caught, the only thing waiting for her was the guillotine. Daisy knelt collapsed on the cold floor, both hands clutching her head tightly. There was no way out anymore. If only someone could help me, even just one person. At that very moment, a long lock of pitch black hair drooped down from above and silently brushed past her shoulder. Daisy looked up in terror. What is this? Hair? Countless strands poured down like a waterfall, engulfing her in darkness. Deep within that dense black curtain of hair, a mouth full of jagged fangs slowly opened. A bright red tongue licked at the corner of its lips. A low voice sounded beside her ear. Need help. Daisy let out a short scream. Why you? What are you? A pitch-black hand suddenly shot out and clamped over her mouth. Chill. You must stay quiet. The dark figure slowly drew nearer, revealing a pale face lined with sharp teeth. I thought you didn't want to get caught. The black-haired man leaned close to her ear. If you promise to stay quiet, I'll let go. Daisy breathed rapidly, then finally gave a stiff nod. She stared fixedly at the entity before her. Who exactly was this? No. Could he even be called human? The man straightened up. Dark energy clung to him, spreading like ink. I caught that fellow's scent, so I came sniffing around. But why is there only you here? Would he spare her if she did as he said? That fellow. The black-haired man bent down and asked Daisy closely. Don't you know? The one covered in eyes. His name is Pharos. Daisy trembled violently. Covered in eyes? Was he talking about that monster? The black-haired man bared his fangs in a grin. Looks like you really do know him. I've got some personal business with him, so you'll have to lead me to him. Daisy shrank back in fear and stammered. Please, wait a moment. About that, the black-haired man let the smile vanish. If you don't want to lead the way, then that would be unfortunate. Didn't you just make a wish a moment ago? He extended his sharp nails and lightly drew a line through the air. I came all this way for such a cheap price. The least you can do is make it worth my trouble, no? The man who had been lying collapsed in the pool of syrup suddenly twitched once. Under Daisy's horrified gaze, the corpse staggered to its feet. The way it stood there made it look exactly like a puppet pulled by strings. The black-haired man stuck out his vicious scarlet tongue, spat, and said, "Heh." Even looking again, this corpse really is to my taste. Only lunatics as gleefully insane. Esme would want to look at him twice. Suddenly, he stopped moving, and a strange smile appeared on his face. Oops, I almost forgot the after-sales service. Countless strands of jet black hair surged from beneath his feet like a tide. In the air rang the crisp, snipping sound of scissors. The two guards dropped down like flowers with their stems cut. Well now, their heads fell off. The two guards walked stiffly onward, their heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. Around their necks remained vicious streaks of syrup-like marks. Their heads, as though manipulated by invisible threads, swayed slightly in rhythm with the movement of their bodies. Daisy collapsed to her knees on the ground, both hands clamped tightly over her mouth, broken sobs escaping from her throat. Standing behind her, the man let out a burst of mad laughter. He clapped his hands together. Yes, exactly like this. Absolutely perfect. The thing you're looking for should be over there, right? He stopped walking, sniffing at the air. I'd bet that rotten stench is already spreading everywhere. Has he set up camp over there? Daisy answered quietly, very likely. Then I'm off now. The man turned around. If you need help again, just call for me. But next time, I'll charge the full price. Daisy raised her head and looked toward the giant flowering tree in the estate. Ever since the day that young lady hanged herself there, the tree had never shown any sign of withering. Even now, the blossoms had never faded. A carriage slowly came to a stop beside her. Sitting high on the driver's seat, the coachman called out, "Where to? Where to?" On the coachman's neck was a long, savage red slash, yet the corners of his mouth were still pulled up in a mechanical smile. "Where do you want to go?" Daisy closed her eyes tightly and took a deep breath. "To the temple." Evangeline halted. She lowered her head and looked at the enormous creature lying in the grass. What is this? She had never seen a creature like this before. In the middle of a flower-filled meadow, a gigantic black wolf was curled up in pain. Several deep wounds marred its side. A strange purple light seeped out from the wounds. The wolf weakly opened its jaws. A broken, pleading groan came from its throat. "Help! Help me!" Evangeline stiffened slightly. A wolf that could speak a human language? Could it be a werewolf? A shrill scream suddenly tore through the air. "The corridor is on fire. Someone, get over here, quick. What in the world is going on over there?" Those screams definitely meant something had happened. Another guard barked an order with certainty. "Hurry!" That feeling. It was a painting going up in flames. The giant painting twisted in the blazing fire. The crowd panicked and scattered in all directions. This was just like a mathematical formula. There was no need to think any further. A talking wolf meant a handsome werewolf. If Gabriel was already the male lead, then this one had to be the second male lead. Evangeline had more or less guessed how the plot would unfold. In the original story, after Kona was bullied by the villainous Evangeline, she would secretly sneak out into the garden and cry alone. There, the young girl would happen to discover an injured wolf. Following the classic formula of a Western fantasy romance novel, beast folk were always hunted by slave traders. So the heroine would devotedly nurse and protect him. Because she always treated him like an ordinary animal, there would be all kinds of intimate accidental touches between them. After that, he would transform into a handsome man. The two would fall for each other, and then the story would continue from there. Wow, this really was textbook fantasy romance material. Evangeline froze. Wait a second, did I just accidentally steal Kona's first meeting scene with the second male lead? That won't do. I need to hurry and call Kona over so she can save this guy. The black wolf let out a painful whimper. Please save me. Looking at how pitiful it was, Evangeline turned her face away awkwardly. Even if you beg me like that, there's nothing I can do alone. I can't carry a body as huge as yours. The moment she finished speaking, the grass and garden in front of her instantly vanished. In their place was a splendid room. Evangeline looked around and asked in surprise, "Huh? Was that you?" The black wolf wagged its tail like a puppy, its eyes sparkling as it answered. That's right, teleportation. So beast folk in this world could use magic too. Looking at the black wolf wagging its tail in front of her, Evangeline thought. It begged so desperately for help. I can't just ignore it. At the very least, I should treat its wounds first. She crouched down and fumbled through its thick fur. That said, how exactly am I supposed to treat you? Your fur's too thick. I can't even see where the wound is. The black wolf replied in a low voice. Please wait a moment. A puff of smoke and sparkling light burst forth. A tall man appeared before her. Evangeline, can you see it clearly now? Evangeline clapped a hand over her mouth and took a startled step back. Good heavens. A wound that bad wasn't something simple first aid could handle at all. What am I supposed to do? Call for a doctor? Just then, a round little three-eyed cat lightly jumped onto the carpet. A tiny, exquisite bottle of medicine hung from its neck. It walked forward with elegant steps until it reached Evangeline. Pudding. Evangeline stared in shock. The delicate little bottle landed safely on the carpet. She picked it up and examined it carefully. Is this holy water? Goodness, our little Pudding really is a genius. They say other people's cats only know how to bring home snakes. But my baby actually brought back holy water. Our clever little spirit, Pudding. Well done. The three-eyed cat let out a bright cry. Could a creature of a fantasy species really be this intelligent? Don't tell me it's also one of the beast folk. No, that can't be. Forget it. Never mind all that. The more important thing was the badly injured person in front of her. Evangeline suddenly paused. Huh? Why are you cowering over there in the corner? Holding the bottle of holy water, she walked over and crouched beside him. Gently, she tried to comfort him. You must be badly hurt. It must hurt a lot, right? Drink this. The man raised his head and looked at the bottle being offered to him. Huh, this? Evangeline tilted her head at him. Is it because you've never had holy water before? No, you can't be picky. If you want to recover quickly, you have to drink it. With that, she decisively pulled out the stopper and poured the holy water straight into the man's mouth. He choked and struggled violently, coughing and retching in pain. As Evangeline kept pouring the medicine, she coaxed him, even if it doesn't taste good, please endure it for a little while. Suddenly she stopped. Oh no, I almost forgot something important. Looking at the man sprawled on the floor, she asked, what's your name? You're not planning to answer me? Then she nodded to herself. Well, I suppose a fugitive beast folk like you really can't reveal your real name. In that case, when you're in wolf form, you have those cute little paw pads under your claws. She raised one finger excitedly and proposed, I'll call you Paw Pad. The man lay flat on the floor, a trace of holy water still at the corner of his mouth, staring blankly at the ceiling with lifeless eyes. That name was just too much. Night fell over Rohan's estate. The entire mansion sank into the stillness of moonlight. The work of the servants on the night shift was only considered finished after the last set of curtains had been drawn shut. Except for the Count's study and the third floor, all the lights elsewhere had already gone out. The estate's cleaning duties rotated according to schedule. Today, it was Oliver's turn to handle the fourth floor. Before coming, a co-worker had comforted her, saying there was nothing scary about the fourth floor. They had even reassured her that Miss Evangeline never left her room, so all she had to do was focus on her work. Oliver stopped and stared at the dark corridor, stretching endlessly ahead. Why did they lie to me? That painful moaning had been going on for quite a while now. Anyone hearing it would get goosebumps. Carrying a lantern, the maid walked slowly through the dim corridor. Along the way, every time she extinguished another lamp, that eerie sound became clearer. She held her breath. Every step made her shudder with fear. Cold sweat poured down her cheeks. She stared straight ahead with wide-open eyes when suddenly something sticky touched her foot. Something had splashed onto the top of her foot. She lowered her head and, by the dim light, saw a pool of dark red liquid on the floor, horrifying to behold. Blood kept seeping through the crack beneath the door, winding and crawling across the spotless white marble floor, like a twisting venomous snake. The maid let out a miserable scream. Before she could even recover from the shock, a hand suddenly reached out from behind her and grabbed her shoulder tightly. You need to be more careful. A low voice sounded by her ear. If you fall backward here, there's a staircase behind you. Oliver gasped for breath, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. The hands supporting her slowly loosened. Kona said softly, Nighttime is very dangerous. Please go back to your room right now. Why, yes. Clutching the lantern tightly, the maid stammered, Teach, thank you. But why are you only coming back now? A maid stood at the end of the corridor with her hands on her hips, looking at the co-worker hurrying toward her. You're the last one to return the lantern. I've been waiting so long, I've run out of patience. Oliver, who had just come down from upstairs, grabbed her. What do you mean, I'm the last one? The other maid frowned and answered, Everyone else already went to sleep. You're the last one. That's impossible. Oliver's face turned pale and her voice shook. But Kona hasn't finished work yet. What are you talking about? The maid in charge of the attendance list looked at her in confusion. There isn't anyone by that name on tonight's night shift list at all. In the dead of night at Rohan's estate, the things wandering in the darkness, those things that were not human, never carried lanterns. Heavy breathing echoed through the darkness. Evangeline was fast asleep, her long hair spread across the pillow. A black shadow was coughing violently beside the bed, and dark red blood splattered across the floor. The black shadow clutched its body tightly. Damn it, this feels like hell. It's like being roasted over a fire. It was only one dose of holy water, and yet it's this destructive. The shadow laboriously lifted its head and looked at the sleeping Evangeline. What in the world is she? Under normal circumstances, one swipe of my claws would have been enough. Whether the other party had holy water or not, they wouldn't be able to lay a finger on me. And yet just now, I couldn't break free from that restraint at all. She can suppress Andres and even make Pharaoh submit like a house cat. Other than a god, who could possibly do something like that? But that creature absolutely cannot be a god. Who summoned her? Whoever was as brought forth in existence far too terrifying. Andres coughed violently, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Be quiet, Andres. You'll wake Miss Evangeline. Don't tell me you still want to drink more holy water. Andres instantly sprang up. You damn cat. If you hadn't brought that bottle of holy water here in the first place. The bedroom door quietly turned, and the lock gave a soft creak. Sorry to interrupt. Kona pushed the door open a crack and poked one eye into the room. You two are making so much noise that we can hear you downstairs. You're scaring my older sister. Can you please be a little quieter? Pharaohs looked at Andres and said, see, even Kona, the one Miss Evangeline dotes on most, is saying so. This is absurd. At this point, it's as if I'm the criminal just because I'm the one making noises in pain. Morning sunlight streamed through the large windows, spilling across the silent corridor. What? Evangeline sat up in bed. Her body felt heavy, as though she'd had sleep paralysis all night. Those hallucinations had screamed without stopping. She hadn't been able to get a proper wink of sleep. Why were there ghosts in this Western romance story? Rubbing her eyes, she thought maybe she still wasn't fully awake, because she still felt as if she were trapped in a dream. She looked at the morning light filtering through the window. The warmth beside her was the only thing that felt real. Pharaohs was curled up at her feet, breathing evenly. But in the end, this still wasn't the real world she knew. This place lacked that sense of reality. It might not be a dream, but it was still a world created out of lines of text. Thinking about it that way, there wasn't much difference. She let out a small sigh. There's no point thinking too much about it. I can't go back right now anyway. Thinking too much would only make her homesick. Evangeline lifted Pharaohs from her feet and held them up to her face. Good morning, Pudding. Andres immediately moved in, sticking out his tongue and wagging his tail. Did you sleep well? Evangeline tightened her hold on Pharaohs. Get down this instant. Andres let out a resentful groan. Why was he the only one who got special treatment? Evangeline turned away sharply, her voice resolute. I do not want to share a bed with another grown man. Andres froze. Doesn't she know he can turn into a person too? He's just pretending to be completely different from me. Evangeline turned to stone. Is that true? Pharaohs let out a bright cry in response. Yes. Images immediately flashed through Evangeline's mind. All the time she had held him in her arms and doted on him, even letting him rub against her cheek. At that moment, a soft light flashed. The cat-shaped creature disappeared, replaced by a small young boy. Do you not like me anymore? Evangeline let out a breath of relief and patted her chest, mumbling to herself, thank goodness. He's just a child. For a second there, I thought I had been cuddling. A grown man. That really scared me. Actually, maybe this is for the best. If I woke up in this body without any warning, then maybe one day I'll suddenly disappear in the same way. Even if one day Pudding suddenly loses his master, Paw Pad will still be by his side. They're both beast folk. Pudding won't be lonely anymore. She hugged Pudding again and gently stroked the boy's hair. I'm very happy because I could never, ever dislike my most precious Pudding. Pharaohs obediently nestled in Evangeline's arms, a smug smile appearing on his face as he cast a provocative glance at Andres. Andres trembled with rage, baring his teeth as he roared, Hey, you get off the bed too. I said get down right now. The noise gave Evangeline a headache, and she had no choice but to intervene. All right, you two need to get along. A light knock came from outside the door. Miss, it's me, Kona. Kona pushed the door open and stepped inside. You're already awake? Holding the cat, Evangeline calmly replied, good morning. Good morning to you two as well. Miss, is there anything you need me to do today? Evangeline looked at the diligent girl in front of her. As expected of the heroine of the story, she really was hardworking. She waved her hands repeatedly. Oh no, don't say that. You don't need to do those things. I don't want to become the kind of villainess who exploits the heroine's labor to the bone. But Kona still insisted, but I really want to serve you. Mississippi, look, I even embroidered a name tag with your initials on it. I just want to repay your kindness. Evangeline hesitated a little and rested her chin on her hand. Since you're so determined, Gabriel said he'd help me, but I still haven't heard anything from his side. I wonder how much he's managed to take care of. Evangeline took out a heavy pouch of money. Take this. Use it for errands and spending money. On your way back, buy whatever you want. This way the heroine's affection level won't go down. Kona lifted the money pouch with both hands, her eyes widening in shock. My goodness, with this much money, I could even buy a whole house. Kana, standing beside her, also leaned over and asked in disbelief, Isn't this a little too much? Evangeline waved her hand. It's fine. Hurry and go do what you need to do. Don't get hurt and don't let anyone trick you. Be careful of traffic and passers-by when you're out. Please don't worry, Mississippi. After all, you're always watching over us, so nothing bad will happen. The carriage sped along the crowded street. Kona leaned out the window to look outside. Sister, look, all the shops are sparkling so brightly. She turned back, her face full of anticipation, and suggested, Why don't we stop by the clothing shops too? And then buy some sweets to bring back for Miss? Kana looked at Kona. Kona, are you planning to spend all the money Miss gave us? Kona tilted her head, her expression falling slightly. Why not? Miss gave us the money so we could spend it. Kana fell silent for a moment. Kona lowered her head, her fingers nervously twining together. I'm sorry, I've never been anywhere this lively before. Not even once. A pang of sympathy rose in Kana's heart as she looked at Kona. Maybe I shouldn't be so strict with a girl who has been so sick all this time that she hasn't even had the chance to see the streets. She gently patted Kona's shoulder. Then on the way back, we'll stop by for a little while. Kona shot her head up. Really? Kana cautioned, but only for a short while. If we're too late getting back, Miss will be waiting. Kona happily threw herself into Kana's arms. Thank you. I'm really happy. Sister, you really care too much about what Miss thinks. One day you'll realize that Miss truly cares about us. Look, you might not be able to see them, but Miss even specially arranged extra eyes to protect us. Kona reached out and touched the enormous blue eyeball floating in the pitch-black darkness. How adorable. A deep, unreadable smile spread across her lips. Hopefully, this sister who had always sacrificed herself for her frail little sister would finally obtain happiness through this opportunity, even if it came by way of the Rohanzen family's favor. Sunlight poured over the pointed dome of the palace. Many lavishly dressed guests had gathered in front of the great gate. One man stared at the crest on a carriage and asked, What family does that carriage crest belong to? The person beside him leaned closer to look. What crest? That crow one? Another person immediately corrected him. No, that's a phoenix. It's the Rohanzen family. The surrounding crowd instantly broke into a commotion. The Rohanzen family still has descendants? Or is it the heir? If so, then it must be one of those two. The chatter among the crowd grew louder and louder. Good heavens, I heard she was dead. It seems those rumors were all nonsense. Or perhaps she truly rose from the dead, just like the phoenix on their family crest. Is that really true? A man in dark formal stepped forward to block their path. Sorry to bother you, but may I ask if you are Miss Rohanzen? Faced with the man's question, Kana grew a little flustered and clutched the collar at her chest as she explained. You must have seen that carriage and misunderstood. We're only Mrs. Servants. After hearing that, the man showed an expression of sudden understanding. Crossing his arms over his chest, he sneered. So that's how it is. I was wondering if you really were Miss Rohanzen. The two of you were dressed far too shabbily. Harsh laughter and mocking voices rang out around them. Kona lowered her head and shrank into the shadows. Looking at the crowd, pointing and whispering all around them, Kana was filled with regret. If only she had listened earlier and gone to the clothing shop with Kona first. Now not only had they been humiliated, they had also tarnished Miss Rohanzen's reputation. The man grew even more arrogant, spitting out insults. Your lady is really far too careless. She sent you to a famous place like the temple, and yet she couldn't at least lend you a few decent outfits to wear. He swept his gaze around and continued in a condescending tone. I heard the Rohanzen family is filthy rich. Looks like the rumors were only rumors after all. Kana anxiously glanced at Kona standing beside her. This man actually dared to say such things openly right in front of Kona. Kona remained silent. Her blazing red hair hid her eyes, and her whole body gave off a cold, eerie aura. Completely unaware, the man kept laughing. Or should I say, has she already been abandoned by her mother's family, the Hosakin ducal house? So much so that she can't even spare enough money to buy clothes for her servants. Kana had never seen that expression on Kona's face before. No, perhaps she had seen it once. Could it be that Kona really intended to kill him right here? Kana hurriedly turned away, not daring to look at that horrifying scene any longer. Please, anything but this. The temple square, which had been noisy just moments ago, suddenly sank into deadly silence. Kana looked around in confusion. Why had it suddenly gone so quiet? Evangeline stepped down from the carriage. Her eyes were slightly lowered, her expression both cold and proud. Going back to a short while earlier, when Evangeline was still at the estate, she sat alone in the spacious dining room. A maid carefully set a plate of food in front of her. When will Kona and the others be back? They've been gone so long without a single word. Did my parents once wait for me with feelings like this too? Lowering her lashes, she murmured softly, "Could it be that I want to see them?" Andres, standing beside her, bent slightly and replied, "If you mean Kona and the others, they most likely haven't even reached the central temple yet. So please focus on eating first." But at that moment, a loud crash came from outside the dining room door. The maid carrying a plate of salad froze in shock. The porcelain dish in her hands fell and shattered across the floor. Fresh vegetables and shards scattered everywhere. The maid let out a startled cry and collapsed to the ground. "I am sorry. I am terribly sorry, miss. Please forgive me just this once." Evangeline looked at the scene before her. A trace of bitterness rose in her heart. Seeing this, how could she possibly keep eating? It seemed she was still being treated like a villainess. She gave a soft sigh and waved her hand. "It's fine. Go get some holy water and treat your injury." As if granted a pardon, the maid hurriedly scrambled to her feet and ran from the dining room. "I miss Kona and Kana so much it hurts. I'm about to go crazy from loneliness." She sprang up from her seat. "Let's go find Kona." Andres, standing beside her, replied in an even tone, "Your protectiveness toward humans, isn't it a little excessive? This has gone beyond normal overprotectiveness." The next second, the surroundings began to blur and twist. Andres lowered his voice. "While no one was paying attention, I teleported us into the carriage." Satisfied now, Evangeline looked around and saw that the scenery had indeed changed to the inside of the carriage. Her face lit up with joy. Well done." Though he sounded reluctant, he still ended up doing as she asked. Suddenly, a commotion of voices drifted in from outside the window. Evangeline tilted her head slightly and peered outside in puzzlement. It sounds like there's some kind of argument going on." The arrogant voice of a man came clearly through the carriage. "The two of you are dressed too shabbily. Your lady is really careless. She sent you to the temple, and yet she couldn't even lend you a few decent outfits? Or has she been abandoned by her mother's family, so she can't even scrape together enough money to buy clothes for her servants?" Evangeline's expression darkened at once. She glared at the laughing man outside the window. "You piece of trash. What exactly did you just say to my children?" She flung the carriage door open. "If you all want to see the villainess so badly, then I'll indulge you." Under everyone's watchful gaze, Evangeline stepped into the square and walked up to the man. In an icy tone, she asked, "Young sir, what exactly were you discussing just now?" Kona was startled and spun around. Her little face immediately broke into a radiant smile as she ran toward the carriage parked nearby. "Miss, you could have just waited at home, but I came out because I was worried about you." Kana, watching this from behind, let out a quiet sigh of relief. If Miss had arrived just a little later, that man might have done something to Kona. No, Kana immediately rejected that thought. Kona had been shut away at home since childhood and basically knew nothing about the outside world. The reason she had dared to talk back earlier was probably just because she didn't understand how to deal with nobles. In the end, with Kona's personality, how could she possibly have the nerve to harm a man? Absolutely impossible. Standing beside the carriage, Evangeline looked at the man opposite her and asked, "Young sir, what exactly were you saying to my girls just now?" The man looked flustered and probed cautiously. "Miss Rohanzan?" Evangeline replied calmly, "That's right. I am Evangeline Rohanzan." The man stammered in alarm. "Then you came with them? If so, why did you get out of the carriage so late?" Evangeline looked toward the carriage and said, "My health is poor. I was resting in the carriage just now, and you are." The man adjusted his collar. trying to regain his composure. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Annulin of the Banger family, from a marquee household. These two looked unfamiliar with the roads, so I intended to give them a little guidance. Evangeline smiled faintly. I see. Listen to him making excuses. Evangeline stared straight at Annulin, and her tone turned cold. I heard you lumped the Rohanzen family and the Hosakin ducal house together, and even made a joke of it. Annulin jolted and reflexively took a step back. Evangeline lightly lifted the hem of her dress. Then tell me this. Does the outfit I'm wearing now also look so ragged that it's unfit to enter the temple? I didn't even bother buying a new dress. I just casually picked one from the corner of my wardrobe. So, Annulin stammered, and no, that's not what I meant. As he faltered, he kept backing away. But suddenly he bumped into a solid chest. Gabriel had appeared behind Annulin at some point. The central temple always welcomes you, my lady, no matter what you wear. Annulin turned in horror, and the moment he recognized the newcomer, he cried out, "Sir Gabriel!" Gabriel paid no attention to his panic. I was the one who lingered in the carriage too long, which is why the young master of House Banger was kind enough to stay here and keep them company. Thank you, Sir Annulin. Terrified, Annulin trembled all over. And no, not at all. Being able to help the lady is my honor, sir. However, I still have urgent matters to deal with, so I'll take my leave first. He did not dare look back and simply bolted deeper into the temple. Watching his miserable, fleeing back, Evangeline grumbled inwardly. Honestly, if the male lead could step in that quickly, then why hadn't he shown up the moment Kona was cornered? Gabriel stepped onto the stairs and asked, "My lady, did you come to see that painting?" Evangeline shook her head. No. At first, I was only going to let the two of them go in ahead, but I was worried about them being on their own, and I was curious about this temple as well. Kona and Kana stood side by side, quietly listening to their conversation. "Since you're all here already, would you like to go see the painting together? A chance like this may be rare in the future." Kona answered with a bright smile. "Yes, I'd very much like to see it, Mississippi." Evangeline smiled and placed a hand over her chest. "You two go ahead and see it. I'll stay here and pray. I have absolutely no desire to go look at some lifeless body painting." After a moment's thought, Gabriel said, "Then I'll arrange for a knight to escort you." Turning behind him, he called loudly, "Julian, escort this lady to the prayer room." The knight struck his chest in salute and answered, "Understood, Commander." Then he turned to Evangeline. "Please come this way, my lady." Gabriel then turned toward Kona and Kana. "I'll lead the two of you." Following the knight up the stairs, Evangeline quietly sighed in relief. Phew, I was worried Gabriel would insist on escorting me personally. Thank goodness. I really hope he loses interest in me completely. Kona looked at Gabriel and asked, "I heard you've been helping clear my lady of suspicion all this time. Has there been any progress?" Gabriel replied in a low voice, "I'm afraid there still hasn't been any significant progress. More and more people are coming to see the painting, and all sorts of rumors are continuing to spread among the people." Kana looked toward the crowd gathered in the distance. "So those people came to see the painting too?" Gabriel nodded. "That's right. Most people came because of that, but some guests came here for other reasons as well." In the central garden of the temple, a fountain poured out a stream of crystal-clear water. A woman approached, cupped her hands, and scooped up a handful of the cool water. She raised it to her mouth and gulped it down, her throat bobbing rapidly with each swallow. Seeing this, Kana murmured, "I've never seen a noble woman do something like that. Can the water in the fountain be drunk?" Gabriel answered calmly, "It can. That is holy water. What did you say?" Kona's eyes widened slightly, and a strange gleam flashed deep within them. Gabriel continued explaining, "Not every guest who comes here has the right to drink it. This is a privilege, reserved only for those who have donated generously. It's just a small performance." Kana suddenly tightened her grip on Kona's hand. Feeling the pressure, Kona turned to look at Kana. A display meant to show the world just how prosperous this temple is. Kona asked softly, "Is the painting up ahead?" Gabriel stopped and pointed forward. "Right over there." He looked toward the crowd gathered in the distance. People's reactions to the painting are completely divided. Some think it's incredibly beautiful and even pray before it in a frenzy. Gabriel turned back, his expression heavy, but there are also those who find it nauseating. Standing before the painting, Kana looked up at the enormous canvas. What kind of painting could provoke such reactions? Suddenly, she covered her mouth and gagged softly. Her whole body froze in place. The divine blessing of the gods rests on this painting. Even the ugliest filth in the human heart could be painted more beautifully than this. Kona stared fixedly at that miserable yet brilliantly colored image. I understand now. This painting really is beautiful. Kana stared at Kona in disbelief. To Kona, this painting was beauty? If Kona were seeing the same thing she was, the girl would never call it beautiful. In Kona's eyes, the painting must look completely different. She must be seeing something else in it. What kind of magic had the artist used to create something this double-sided? Kana finally understood why the painting was still hanging in the temple even now. Those contradictory reactions only made it more mysterious. No matter how much one tried to explain the truth, it would be useless to those who believed the painting was beautiful. If she spoke up to refute it now, it would sound no different from deliberately slandering the work. Gabriel looked at Kona and said, "It seems the painting looks different in your eyes as well, Miss Kona. As for me, it gives me a deep sense of discomfort." Kana asked quietly, "I want to know what this difference really comes from." Gabriel replied, "Who knows? They would probably say it's because each person's level of devotion is different." Hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Raphael ran quickly toward Gabriel. "Commander, I knew I'd find you here." Turning back, Gabriel asked, "Raphael?" With a grave expression, Raphael lowered his voice. "There's an emergency. You need to come at once." Gabriel turned and said, "Could you two wait here for a moment? I need to step away." Kana nodded. "All right, we'll wait here." Gabriel hurried off with Raphael. Kana watched their retreating backs. She truly wanted to leave this place right now. But Kona was so absorbed in staring at the painting that she could not abandon the girl and run off alone. Kona still stood before the painting, the corners of her lips curving upward slightly. "Sister," the girl turned around. A strange light shone in her eyes. "Does the painting look different to you too?" "To me, it looks like a pile of eyes." Kana stiffened in shock. Eyes. That was exactly what she had seen. So Kona was seeing exactly the same thing she was, and yet she still called it beautiful. She found those horrifying eyes beautiful. No normal person could look at eyeballs gouged from human bodies and praise them as beautiful. Kana lowered her head, her heart filled with fear and extreme unease. Kona's perception had completely broken down. It felt as though something bizarre was hiding inside the girl's body. She had no idea when this change began. Was it after Donald kidnapped her? Or after she met that young lady? Or perhaps that distortion had always been hidden beneath her frail shell, never changing at all? Kana fell into inner turmoil. Faced with her little sister, what was she supposed to say? Was she supposed to point straight at her and say, "You're not normal anymore"? This child had been sickly since she was very young. Only recently had she begun to learn how to smile. Kana truly could not bear to hurt her. Besides, Kona was currently being doted on by Mississippi. If the girl wanted to remain by Mrs. side, then perhaps maintaining the current state of things was the best choice. Kana reached out and pressed a hand to Kona's shoulder. "Kona." Kona looked back in confusion. "Sister." Kana put on a stern face and warned her, "Listen to me. You absolutely must not let anyone know that you saw eyes. If someone asks, just say the painting looks very sacred. Say the same thing as everyone else, understood? The people of the temple have already started worshiping this painting. As long as you go along with them, you won't bring trouble on yourself." Kona gave a bright smile and obediently replied, "Yes, sister." Kana looked at the Kona before her. When the girl smiled so brightly at her like this, she could not feel anything unusual about her at all. But what if all of this was just her trying to find an excuse? Was it because she could not face her sister honestly? That she had chosen to avoid the truth? No, absolutely not. Kana stopped and turned to look behind her. Everything she had done all this time had been for her little sister's sake. The grand corridor of the temple was silent, without a sound. Evangeline sat in an exquisitely carved chair, her head nodding sleepily. "Why is it so warm in here? It really makes you drowsy." She had clearly come here to pray, only to fall asleep instead. At first, she had thought that coming to a place like this might trigger some special transmigrator perk, like talking directly with a god or something. It seemed that even in dreams, no such good thing would happen. As expected, she had been overthinking it. She rose and walked toward the door. "Have I kept you waiting long?" The knight shook his head. "Not at all. There are worshippers praying here all day. Now then, I'll take you to the commander." Evangeline stopped and gently placed a hand over her chest. "Before we go, may I ask you for one thing? I'd like to buy a little holy water." If she wasn't going to get any special transmigrator perk, then at the very least she ought to stock up on some recovery items. Although she didn't know why such things seemed ineffective on her, they would surely be useful for something else. Spreading both hands, Evangeline gestured animatedly as she smiled and asked, "Would 10 bottles be possible?" With a clear clack, an exquisite wooden box was opened. Inside, 10 bottles of holy water were arranged neatly, glimmering with a soft light. The knight exclaimed in admiration, "How impressive, my lady. Even if I spent several years' worth of my wages, I still wouldn't be able to buy this much." Evangeline looked at his enthusiastic expression. She thought to herself, the name really didn't sound like a knight's name at all. It sounded more like a salesman's. Evangeline looked at the whole box of holy water and felt a bit troubled. Then again, how was she supposed to carry all this? If she had to haul it all herself, that would be far too inconvenient. Evangeline turned her head toward the big lump. Andres stayed rooted to the spot. "You're not thinking of making me carry all this, are you?" Evangeline asked, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Then are you saying I should carry it myself?" Andres clutched his chest. His face was full of aggrieved accusation. "No, this is too cruel. You're even worse than a devil." Evangeline looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Big lump, I am very politely asking you to move them." Andres hugged the heavy wooden box, looking as if his soul had been sucked out of him. Evangeline watched him and was left somewhat speechless. Was he really making such a fuss just because he didn't want to carry things? Honestly, that box wasn't even that heavy. Andres staggered along behind her, groaning and complaining without pause. Evangeline ignored him and kept walking straight ahead. He could follow if he wanted. In any case, he was a werewolf. Even if he got lost, he could use his sense of smell to track her down. Evangeline walked along the splendid corridor. Suddenly, she stopped. Her gaze shifted forward. By the fountain, 2 figures were talking in hushed voices. "Who are those 2? The pair passed through the corridor beneath the soaring arches. Gabriel spoke up and asked Raphael, "What exactly happened?" As they walked, Raphael explained, "We found a witness. She's willing to give testimony about that painting. I've already verified her identity. She's very credible. Before she fled, she used to be a maid in Lady Evangeline's service. First, I confirmed the rumors about Lady Evangeline with her. She insists that she saw with her own eyes that the young lady, who had already died, came back to life. And she also saw her use the magic circle in Donald's painting to summon something. The magnificent architecture of the temple stood solemn beneath the deep blue sky. The massive doors were pushed open, letting out a harsh scraping sound. Daisy lowered her head and entered the hall between 2 guards. That thing was definitely not an angel. They used the summoning circle priest Belga mentioned before to call forth something like a demon. Daisy shrank into the corner of a sofa, her body trembling slightly. The people that demon killed had their heads cut off and then sewn back on. They walked around as if they had never died. If it weren't for the red thread around their necks, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart from normal people at all. I came to the temple to confirm what priest Belga saw in the painting. The reason I decided to come forward and testify is because I believe that thing must be completely destroyed." Gabriel listened in silence, his eyes growing profound. Those dead people who had come back to life were all puppets returned from the devil's hand. But Evangeline's neck was completely clean. There was no trace of stitching at all, nor was there any red thread ring that symbolized death. Gabriel sank into thought. If Evangeline, too, had been brought back from the dead, why was she so different? What exactly was it that made that woman so special? Gabriel closed his eyes, and his memory returned to that night of raging flames. Amid the sea of fire that lit up the sky, Evangeline stood with her back to everyone. Her long hair fluttered in the heat waves. When she slowly turned around, her platinum hair, originally pale, had been dyed a blazing red by the firelight. Evangeline gazed forward in silence. Those red eyes of hers carried a coldness and distance that stirred the heart. That image remained deeply imprinted in Gabriel's mind, like a flower blooming on a withered branch. That corpse had moved in defiance of divine power. Its existence had awakened his curiosity, or rather, to be more precise, it was a feeling closer to fear. If the being wearing Evangeline's skin, that monster bearing the face of House Rowan Zen, were someday to grow tired of pretending to be human and stop this game, he could not imagine at all what would happen then. So this was the reason. This was why he could never stop himself from wanting to help Evangeline. He withdrew from his thoughts and called out, "Raphael." Raphael immediately stepped forward and waited respectfully for orders. Gabriel instructed. Bring over the 2 guests who were with me earlier. Since they seem inclined to support Evangeline, I should share this report with them. A moment later, the heavy doors were pushed open. Raphael's voice came from outside. Commander, I've brought them. Please come in. Daisy suddenly halted, her whole body stiffening in place. Kana looked at the girl before her. Daisy, why are you here? Daisy stared at Kana in disbelief. Kana said, I heard you went blind. Are you all right? Kana stepped forward and reached out with concern, but Daisy reacted as if she had seen something utterly horrifying. Her pupils shrank abruptly, and her whole body began trembling violently. She backed away in terror and stammered, Kana, who is that? Kana hurriedly explained. She's my younger sister. She's been working with me at the estate lately. Hearing that, Daisy seemed to suffer an enormous shock. She clutched her head in pain, digging her nails into her skin, letting out despairing groans. What have I done? I have to get out of here. Gabriel reached out, intending to stop her, and said in a low voice, Miss Daisy, we still need your testimony. Daisy screamed hysterically. I've already told you everything I know. Isn't that enough? Gabriel watched Daisy's shattered figure flee and thought to himself that letting those 2 meet face to face had apparently been a mistake. He turned and instructed Raphael beside him. Raphael, escort her out of the temple. Raphael gave a slight bow and immediately went after Daisy, courteously showing the way. Please, this way. As they passed each other, Daisy leaned close to Kana's ear and whispered something. Then she ran off without looking back. Kana stood frozen in place for a long while, still unable to recover herself. Gabriel spoke up. Kana, what did Miss Daisy just say? Kana lowered her head, both hands gripping the hem of her skirt tightly. It was nothing. Really, it was nothing. Gabriel studied Kana's pale face and understood at once. It seemed Daisy had not cooperated as he had expected either. In that case, he could only choose to help Evangeline instead. The fountain in the temple courtyard continued spraying water tirelessly. Evangeline lifted the hem of her elaborate lace dress and slowly walked over the shining marble floor. She stopped and looked toward the pool. A knight was approaching from the corridor. Sir Raphael. Raphael turned around, a bright smile blooming on his face. Julian and Lady Rohan Zen as well. Evangeline stood there quietly, her red eyes calmly fixed on him. Hello. Raphael quickly walked over. I'm Raphael of the Polaro's Knight Order. We've met before. Do you remember me, my lady? I was there at the scene when the fire happened too. You came here at the commander's request, didn't you? Thank you very much. Have you had the chance to look around the temple yet? It's incredibly magnificent. The first time I saw it, I was completely dumbfounded. Evangeline looked at the lively knight in front of her and thought to herself that he truly was a knight overflowing with energy. Raphael suddenly seemed to remember something. Oh, right. This nun also used to work for House Rohan Zen. Do you remember her, my lady? Evangeline looked at the face before her. It did seem somewhat familiar, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't recall exactly who it was. Feeling a little awkward, she asked, May I ask your name? Daisy suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes were full of fear and disbelief. Why you? Don't remember my name? Evangeline let out a helpless sigh. In situations like this, amnesia really was the perfect excuse. I lost my previous memories. Daisy lowered her head, her voice tiny as a mosquito's buzz. My name is Daisy. Evangeline looked at the girl, trembling before her. Did you resign because of me? Daisy did not answer, only bowed her head even lower. Evangeline inwardly groaned. As expected, this really was because of the villainous Evangeline. Just what had she done to this child in the past? How outrageous must those things have been for just a few words to frighten the other girl this badly? This reputation was truly awful. Evangeline reached out and gently placed a hand on Daisy's shoulder. You must have been very frightened, weren't you? But don't be afraid. I won't hurt you anymore. Evangeline gave her a gentle smile. If there is anything you want, just tell me. I'll give you whatever reward you want on the condition that you don't go outside and talk nonsense about my affairs. Evangeline let out a sigh of relief and patted her chest, muttering to herself, all right, the situation isn't too terrible yet. Gabriel is probably a little interested in me, so it should be fine. At the very least, he won't do anything that would harm me. Andres came over carrying the box and said, My lady, I'm here. Evangeline complained in dissatisfaction. Honestly, why are you so late? Andres replied helplessly, Come on. But in the end, I still obeyed you and came running over, didn't I? didn't I? Andres turned his head, his gaze falling on Daisy, not far away. Do you two know each other? Daisy looked extremely restless. I have to go. Let me see you off as sister. Daisy flinched and hurriedly waved her hands in refusal. It's fine, no need. The carriage is right over there. Knight Raphael watched Daisy's retreating back and said, All right, that does seem to be the case. Daisy ran off without once looking back. Evangeline looked at the empty corridor. She's gone. The knight replied somewhat helplessly. It seems so. So, did you two have a pleasant conversation? To protect your privacy, I kept my ears tightly covered. Evangeline fell into thought. I'm not sure. She didn't look like she wanted to talk to me. To be honest, I don't even remember who she is. The knight attending her said, What? Well, if all the servants were lined up in a row, I probably wouldn't be able to tell who was who either. Evangeline looked at the knight's bright smile, yet unease rose again in her heart. He was clearly smiling so gently, so why did he seem so suspicious? Daisy had obviously run off in the middle of speaking with her just now. Wouldn't a normal person ask why? Was this what it meant to hide one's depths? Could he be the scheming type? Raphael turned to Andres and asked, By the way, who is this young master? Evangeline immediately cut in and answered, Is my bodyguard. Raphael clasped his hands together in sudden understanding. Ah, so you are a knight. You don't have a sword at your side. I didn't notice just now. Andres spread his hands, a flippant smile on his face. Even without a sword, I'm still very strong. Raphael lowered his eyes, the corners of his lips lifting in a meaningful smile. I see. Then, he turned and said to the colleague beside him, I remember now, before going home, you still need to go to the knight's reception room to meet the captain, right? In that case, I'll head back with you. Lead the way. How would you know Daisy? Evangeline asked. Andres asked back, The girl just now. Her. We just helped each other with a little something. Evangeline stared at him suspiciously. You didn't bully her, did you? Andres curled his lip, putting on an innocent face in self-defense. How could I? I helped her. I was the one who helped her escape, you know. Evangeline took on a thoughtful expression and murmured, I think I vaguely understand now. So those injuries were mostly left by the slave traders after all. After all, he had just said with his own mouth that they had escaped together. That meant Daisy and he had both been captured by slave traders before. That was why Daisy had looked so frightened when she saw him just now, because he had brought back the painful memories of when she was imprisoned. People usually called this post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Andres added from the side. Besides, I also cleaned up the scene very thoroughly afterward. Evangeline looked at him and said, So you even took care of those slave traders while you were at it? That truly deserves praise. Evangeline reached out and gently stroked his hair, praising him. You did well. In a corridor not far away, Raphael stopped walking and silently witnessed the scene. He turned his head, wearing a meaningful smile, and asked as if not paying it much mind. The relationship between you and your bodyguard seems quite close, doesn't it? If the woman your superior likes is patting another man on the head, then for a subordinate, that situation might become a little awkward. Evangeline awkwardly withdrew her hand. Covering her mouth, she gave a soft laugh and repeatedly denied it. Not all. We are absolutely not close. Raphael stopped, tilted his head slightly, and replied in a low voice, I understand. So that's how it is. In the distance, mountain ridges rose and fell. Sunlight blanketed the peaceful village. Jim wandered everywhere in search of inspiration. He was determined to create a masterpiece far beyond all his previous works. Ever since he had found inspiration in Donald's death, he had been unconsciously drawn to places filled with the breath of death. At last, he discovered a corpse that left him extremely satisfied, seeing an old woman clutching the lifeless body of a child and crying bitterly. He actually stood right in front of that grief-stricken elder and endlessly praised that cold corpse. Jim stretched out both arms and, nearly crazed, begged the old woman to allow him to paint that lifeless body. But no family could tolerate such blasphemy. The old woman furiously cursed him and drove him out of the village. Jim fled with his pack on his back, but he still could not give up on the unfinished painting. In the end, he sneaked back into the village and stole the lifeless body. Carrying the small corpse in his arms, he vanished into the night. When the old woman learned what had happened, she flew into a mad rage. She gathered the furious villagers, who raised torches and farm tools high as they searched everywhere for Jim's whereabouts. In the end, the villagers caught up with him in the wilderness. They surrounded Jim and beat him with clubs until he died. Jim collapsed in a pool of blood, his body twisted. At that very moment, something eerie happened. At the instant Jim breathed his last, as if wanting to follow its master, his painting also suddenly burst into fierce flames. Horrified screams rose from the crowd. "Look, over there!" Flames erupted from nowhere and quickly devoured the entire canvas. The skeleton in the painting twisted and writhed within the fire, as if trying to break free from its shackles. The onlookers fell into panic. Someone shouted, "No, no!" The painting suddenly caught fire. Chaos spread through the temple's exhibition hall. The invited guests fled in all directions. Someone shouted orders. "Go call the Polaro's Night Order at once. We absolutely cannot let the sacred painting be burned like this." The hall filled with noisy discussion. No one could understand this sudden phenomenon. Evangeline noticed something was wrong. It's on fire? Someone come here, no." Raphael frowned. "Were those screams? Something must have happened. Let's go take a look." Raphael ran quickly toward the source of the chaos. A strangely familiar feeling rose in his heart, suddenly bursting into flames. This feeling, the sight before him, made him freeze on the spot. Blazing fire was swallowing everything. "Look, the painting is burning." In the midst of the chaos, someone screamed in panic, "Sir Knight, please put out the fire. Sir Knight, the painting is burning." The screams rang out without end. The crowd descended into utter chaos. Countless hands stretched forward, crying out desperately, "Sir Knight, please, save the painting. Sir Knight, good heavens, had they all gone mad? Just because of a painting, people were losing their minds like this. Shouldn't they just let it burn to ashes? No, I can't do it. I can't let the painting be destroyed like this." A young man charged straight into the sea of flames. He spread his arms and tightly embraced the huge burning painting. The fire immediately engulfed his back. A miserable scream tore through the air. "Meeson, why was he here? I clearly locked him in a room." Seeing this, Raphael roared, "Meeson, put the painting down. Let go of it now." Meeson seemed unable to hear a single sound. He ignored the fire spreading across his body, both hands still gripping the frame tightly. Raphael shouted at the figure in the flames, "Meeson, snap out of it. Let go now." Meeson groaned in pain within the fire. The flames had already climbed to his shoulders. Raphael ground his teeth. Damn it, if this kept up, the man would burn to death. Was force the only way to drag these people away? What exactly was going on here? At that very moment, Raphael heard whispers by his ear, as if a corpse were muttering to him. The scorching heat that had been there suddenly vanished into nothingness. In its place came a bone-piercing chill. Raphael froze in place. He could sense that some enormous creature was behind him, staring straight at him. A gigantic red eye opened in the void, lowering its gaze upon his tiny figure. Clear, ringing footsteps echoed out. Evangeline walked forward with graceful strides. With a calm expression, she passed through this earthly inferno. The crowd that had been clinging to Raphael also completely stopped moving. With vacant eyes, they slowly turned their heads to look at Evangeline as she approached. The moans, the screams, all the noise suddenly vanished without a trace at this very moment. It was as if everything that had just happened had been a lie. Evangeline passed through the deathly silent crowd and came to Meeson's side. Meeson was still clutching the painting tightly to his chest. He knelt amid the flames and slowly raised his head to look at Evangeline as she drew near. Raphael watched the scene from afar. At that very moment, he realized that he was witnessing the birth of a fanatic. Meeson's face was covered in soot and ash. His eyes trembled with extreme fervor. Yearning, fear, worship, ecstasy. No words could accurately describe what he was feeling right now when his gaze met Evangeline's. It was as if Meeson had witnessed a miracle. Deep within those blazing red eyes, what exactly had he seen? Evangeline stretched out her hand, her fingertips hovering lightly in midair. She took the bottle of holy water from Andres. With an expressionless face, she turned and poured out all the liquid in the bottle over Meeson. The empty metal bottle slipped from Evangeline's hand, falling onto the stone floor with a dull clang. Water dripped down Meeson's hair and fell into the silent hall, making soft pattering sounds. Meeson completely lost consciousness. His whole body went limp and collapsed onto the soaked floor. Sir Meeson. Evangeline stood quietly to one side, her hands folded before her stomach. A nearly holy smile appeared on her face. If he had already been cleansed with holy water, then there was no need for further treatment. Evangeline stood still in place. Why was everyone just standing there watching the show instead of rushing in to save someone being burned by fire? They were just like social media addicts, only worried about taking pictures at an accident scene. If she hadn't had to drag this heavy body all the way here, there might really have been a death. Fortunately, she had prepared holy water in advance. As the tension gradually faded, Evangeline let out a long breath. She looked slightly drained. At that moment, a group of clergy hurried over. A middle-aged man stepped forward and bowed to Evangeline as he said, "Greetings, Lady Rohanzin. I'm Bishop Jabania. Thank you sincerely for saving the temple's night." Evangeline, looked at the kind-faced middle-aged man and felt slightly relieved. Bishop Jabania continued, "Though it is not much of a reward, we will compensate you for all the holy water you used to put out the fire." Evangeline immediately perked up. Great. That meant she wouldn't have to pay out of pocket to buy holy water anymore. It seemed being a good person really was rewarded. She turned and ordered the attendant behind her, "Take these things back to the carriage." Andres sounded somewhat resigned as he complained lazily, "Did you bring me here just to work me to death?" Evangeline turned back and flashed him a bright but highly threatening smile as she said, "While I still haven't actually worked you to death, hurry up and do it." Andres shrank back. "I'm already about to die from exhaustion." Bishop Jabania was pulling Raphael aside to speak to him in a low voice, while Evangeline watched them from a distance. That kindly old man seemed to be instructing the knight about something, but his voice was too low to hear clearly. Evangeline kept having the feeling that while speaking, the bishop would occasionally glance secretly in her direction. They weren't talking badly about her behind her back, were they? Raphael lowered his head in thought for a moment. "Sir, please allow me to take my leave first. I want to take Meeson away to rest as soon as possible." Bishop Jabania nodded. "I should have thought of that earlier. Leave the rest to me. Go take care of your matters." Raphael thanked him once more, then quickly turned and walked away. "Please come this way, my lady. The people accompanying you are with the captain." Evangeline clasped her hands before her chest and smiled in relief, as if a burden had been lifted. "Oh, thank you. I was worried because I didn't know where those children had run off to. They must have been waiting for a long time. I'd better go over there quickly." In another corner of the temple, Raphael was walking through the lofty corridor. "Please forgive me for greeting you so late. Thank you for saving Meeson. Although he lost consciousness, thanks to the holy water, he wasn't injured. We're deeply grateful." Evangeline clasped her hands before her chest and smiled brightly. "I only did what everyone should have done." At this rate, couldn't she finally shake off the title of villainess? She truly hoped she could smoothly escape the path of a villain like this. The temple priests began dispersing. The gathered believers. Everyone should probably return home now. Another priest joined in and urged them as well. That's right. Staying here after a fire is too dangerous. However, the crowd that should have been noisy was now sunk in a strange silence. Looking at the believers standing motionless like statues, unease surged in the priest's heart. How strange. Why isn't anyone moving? He turned to ask a young woman beside him, "You haven't gone home yet? The painting is already burned up, so what are you still staring at?" The young woman did not reply. She looked like someone who had lost her soul, her vacant gaze fixed straight ahead. Her right hand slowly rose, and her finger pointed in a certain direction in the hall. The priest looked in the direction she was pointing. In that instant, he finally realized what was wrong. He began wondering why he had not noticed it sooner. Along the path Evangeline had just walked, Evangeline strode along the wide corridor, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty space. She suddenly felt tense. If Daisy had told Gabriel everything about the cruel thing she had done in the past, then the situation was truly bad. Even though Daisy had once promised to help her, she still had to find a way to salvage her image. If Gabriel changed his mind because of this and decided not to help her anymore, she would lose an important ally. She had to confirm what Gabriel really thought of her now. Evangeline took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy doors of the hall. Gabriel stood in the middle of the hall, looking at Evangeline as she approached. "You've come, Lady Rohanzen." Evangeline stopped and replied, "Yes, were you waiting?" Before she could finish, Kana suddenly rushed out from a corner. "Miss!" The little girl threw herself straight into Evangeline's arms. Evangeline was knocked back half a step. With helplessness, she said, "Kana, that's dangerous." Kana hugged Evangeline tightly and smiled a little shyly. Sorry. Normally, the older Kana would definitely have stepped in to stop her. Why was she just standing there dazed now, staring at Kana? "Did you fight with your sister?" Kana shook her head. "No. Ever since she heard what Daisy said earlier, she's been like this the whole time." Just how shocking was that truth? That could make her ignore even her most beloved little sister? Gabriel held out a hand. "Lady Rohanzen, please sit here." Evangeline obediently sat down. That's right, Gabriel was the key figure now. Gabriel looked around and frowned. "Where did Julian go?" "I clearly remember telling Julian to escort you, my lady." Raphael stepped forward and reported in a low voice, "Commander, Julian is currently in the infirmary. Meeson was injured." After hearing the whole story, Gabriel understood. "So that's what happened. Thank you for saving Meeson, my lady." Since the bishop personally went to the scene, I believe the matter of the painting catching fire will be settled soon. After all, the bishop himself was never particularly fond of that painting. As for the Donau case, the number of people paying attention to it will likely dwindle as well. The investigation we conducted when taking the painting down should also prove useful. Is that so? I'm very curious what it is you've been investigating all this time. I heard you came here instead of going to the crime scene because of the painting since a witness appeared. So what exactly did Daisy say about me? Gabriel's expression grew serious. She said nothing. I didn't hear anything at all about you. Evangeline froze. This was far too strange. Daisy had clearly said she had told him. Gabriel handed over a stack of documents. "This is the testimony left behind by the witness who just departed." Evangeline took the papers. "Let me see. Donau's painting was meant to summon something?" As she read the contents, horror rose in her heart. Just how far had her summoning magic circle spread? Could the painting catching fire just now also be connected to that abbess from the monastery? Evangeline hurriedly flipped to the next page, and then the next one. Evangeline Rohanzen. Was this the part written about her? Suddenly, the lines on the paper began twisting violently. The letters that had been clear just a moment ago, now kept flickering and breaking apart like a glitched video. Wait, why did it have to malfunction right now? Was her automatic translation feature for transmigrators malfunctioning? Why were these ordinary lines suddenly shattering? Treatment like this really was worse than what even Divine Beast got. Gabriel looked at her and asked evenly, "Does this answer satisfy you?" Evangeline was so tense that sweat poured down her. Damn it, she absolutely couldn't let him discover that she basically couldn't read these words at all right now. Gabriel gestured with his hand. "If you'd like, you may take this file back with you." Evangeline looked at his unreadable face. Judging from his attitude, the matter probably wasn't that serious. He seemed incredibly calm right now, aside from that excessively handsome face. It was impossible to read any extra information from his expression. But honestly, he really was handsome from every angle. Evangeline decided to put the file away first and wait until the translation function recovered before reading it carefully. She turned to Kana beside her and said, "Kana, could you hold this for me?" Kana took the paper. The moment her fingertips touched the testimony, her eyes suddenly became cold and profound, fastening themselves on the contents of the page. Evangeline noticed the abnormality. "Kana?" Kana jolted back to herself. "I'll keep it safe. I absolutely won't let anything happen to it." Evangeline looked at Kana in confusion. What had that been just now? It felt like the way the girl had looked at the paper had been a little frightening. Had she just imagined it? Gabriel's voice rang out again, cutting off her train of thought. "Does this answer satisfy you, my lady?" Evangeline gave a slight nod. "Yes, this is enough." Gabriel looked at her intently. "I've told you before, haven't I, that I want to help you." Evangeline avoided his gaze. This man really was slick-tongued. He truly was the typical male lead of a romance novel. A knock sounded from outside the door. Through the door, a knight reported, "Commander, Bishop Jabania wishes to see you." Gabriel stood up and replied, "Understood. Tell him that after I see Lady Evangeline off, I'll come over at once." "Let's go, my lady." Evangeline stood up as well. "Yes, I feel I've stayed too long, too." The sunset dyed the sky red. A carriage waited in front of the magnificent building. The moment Evangeline appeared, Andres immediately ran over to greet her, loudly calling out, "Master, I'm back. Thank you for waiting." Evangeline reached out and gently patted Andres on the head. "Lady Evangeline." Evangeline turned around and saw Gabriel extending a hand toward her. He probably wanted to help her into the carriage by holding her hand. Evangeline placed her hand in Gabriel's broad palm. Gabriel took her hand along with emotion, gentle but allowing no refusal. Gabriel lowered his head slightly and placed a light kiss on the back of Evangeline's hand. He whispered, "I very much look forward to the day I see you again." Evangeline stood frozen in place, staring at the man before her. She silently stepped into the carriage. The carriage slowly rolled away and disappeared into the evening light. What was that just now? Unconsciously, she curled her fingers and pressed them tightly to her chest. What on earth had that just been about? Thank you for watching the whole video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell so you won't miss the newest videos.